Audiobook by Fate's Reader. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel for more epic series. Drop your recommended novel below. We love to know what you want to hear next. Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 261. Li Tianxing and the Emperor. Qin Mu examined Emperor Yanfeng and saw that he was like a tattered sack filled with grain. Grain would pour out of a tattered sack just as blood poured out from the emperor. His situation was grim. His qi and blood were failing rapidly. With his qi and blood lost, booming sounds came from the divine treasures, which sounded like the sky and earth crumbling. His divine treasures were already crumbling, so if he wasn't treated in time, he wouldn't last 2 hours before dying. So it's Palace Grandee. Emperor Yanfeng opened his eyes with difficulty and asked weakly, "Am I still savable?" Qin Mu examined his injuries in detail, and his 10 fingers moved quickly as he used heavenly devil creation technique to seal his souls and spirits, preventing them from leaving his body. Emperor Yanfeng instantly couldn't speak or move his eyeballs. Qin Mu fetched some dragon saliva and applied it on his wounds. When he raised his head, he saw that Blind and Old Ma had already left. Are they luring those pursuers away? Qin Mu wasn't certain, so he just said to the dragon Qilin, "Return to Granny's house." The dragon Qilin turned around. Qin Mu in the meantime sat on its back and fed Emperor Yanfeng the dragon's saliva before massaging his body to squeeze out the extravasated blood. Doing some mental calculations, he took out a few spirit pills. Back when he had comprehended unity technique, the qi and blood in his body had been exhausted due to a huge flaw which caused his vitality to deteriorate. At that time, he had refined 2 kinds of spirit pills to save his life. One kind was Spirit Buddha pill to replenish his vitality, and the other kind was Blood Thriving pellet to replenish his qi and blood. In the end, he also used Spirit Returning pill great supplement technique to eat a red dragon carp king to fully replenish the emptiness in his body. The spirit pills in his hand were Blood Thriving pellets. Qin Mu hesitated. Emperor Yanfeng was still savable, even if his qi and blood were failing. But if he consumed Blood Thriving pellets so his qi and blood became vigorous, the crumbling divine treasures might just topple. Emperor Yanfeng was exceptionally talented, so if the energy in his divine treasures was to suddenly explode, there would be nowhere to release the torrential energy. The emperor would just suddenly explode, and even Qin Mu and the dragon Qilin would be blown into pieces by the out-of-control energy. Yet, if he didn't replenish the qi and blood for the emperor, his condition would be very dangerous. I have to guide the energy from his divine treasures out before replenishing his qi and blood. Qin Mu pondered for a moment. The best way to use the silver needles was to guide the violent energy out. However, once the silver needles were stabbed into his divine treasures, they would probably melt and wouldn't be able to guide the dissipated energy in time. The next method was sealing, to seal the energy of Emperor Yanfeng's divine treasures in his body. However, Qin Mu didn't have such strong magic power to be able to seal Emperor Yanfeng's cultivation. The next method was to use spirit pills or poison to dissolve his power, dissolving it. However, these kinds of spirit pills were usually refined with highly toxic herbs. If he wasn't careful, Emperor Yanfeng's body might just dissolve as well. Qin Mu decided to use the second method. He didn't have the ability to seal Emperor Yanfeng's cultivation, but Granny C should have. However, even if I save him, he will only be a useless person. Qin Mu felt sorrow. Emperor Yanfeng was just at the time of his best years and his body was very good. He could have lived some 200-300 years more, but after this torment, he would become like an ordinary human, with only the lifespan of only a few dozen years left. A powerful ruler of a generation becoming an ordinary human, even Emperor Yanfeng wouldn't be able to handle this blow. Qin Mu didn't know how dejected he would be when he woke up. The second method may be the best method. By sealing the energy in his body, he might just be able to fix his divine treasures. Qin Mu shook his head. This possibility was very slim. The dragon Qilin returned to Granny C's house in the forest. Qin Mu's vital qi burst forth, and he lifted Emperor Yanfeng with his vital qi without any bump. Granny C came out when she heard the commotion and was astonished. "Mu'er, what have you done?" "Emperor, You plan to skin the emperor and become the emperor yourself? Rascal, you're growing up more and more. Granny C was over the moon before becoming worried. However, the 3,000 beauties in the emperor's chambers of imperial concubines are all little vixens. Be careful about getting charmed to death. Qin Mu said helplessly, I'm not skinning him to become the emperor. Granny, help me seal the energy inside his divine treasure so he won't explode. I'm going to buy some herbs. Don't turn the emperor into clothing. Granny C had a worried expression. You have to come home before the sky turns dark. Otherwise, Li Tianqing, that slut, will definitely be happy to put on the emperor's skin and become the emperor. Emperor Yanfeng had awakened then and heard their conversation. He thought to himself, who is this granny of Palace Grandee? Such a vicious person. And also, isn't Li Tianqing dead? How come he's also here? His injuries were too severe, though, so he fell back asleep. Qin Mu ran out the door quickly and determined his location before running toward the closest city. It was a quiet city and it wasn't big. Because of the disaster, many herbs were unavailable. Qin Mu went through a few herb shops to gather enough herbs to replenish some qi and blood, then immediately sprinted back. When he returned, the sky had yet to turn dark. He let out a sigh of relief and examined his patient. He saw that Granny C had already sealed the energy in the divine treasures of Emperor Yanfeng and hidden them in his corporeal body. Emperor Yanfeng was still alive, even if his body was starting to disintegrate. His souls and spirits were fine, though. Once you undo Heavenly Devil Creation Technique, his corporeal body won't be able to bind his souls and spirits. He's bound to die. Granny C said. He won't die. Qin Mu said solemnly. I can make his souls and spirits remain in the human world. As long as his body still has breath, I can save him. Granny C shook her head. I shall go and prepare dinner. You have to be careful after that, since the old devil will be out. Qin Mu shivered and immediately fed Emperor Yanfeng some blood-thriving pellet and spirit Buddha pills before using vital qi to help him dissolve the medicinal energy. He then stabbed Emperor Yanfeng's body with silver needles to guide the medicinal energy before refining some more spirit pills. Granny C finished making dinner and called Qin Mu over to eat. When the both of them were done with dinner, Granny C turned and went into the room while Qin Mu continued to take care of Emperor Yanfeng. After some time, a soft voice came from outside as Granny C laughed. Mu'er, how's His Majesty doing? Qin Mu's soul shivered from that voice, and he said without moving from his place, Cult Master Li, you're also the cult master of our sacred cult. What's this for? The voice immediately became old, and he chuckled. I'm already dead, so I'm no longer part of Heavenly Saint cult. Great educational Heavenly Devil scriptures have also been passed down to you, so why do you have to get involved with what I want to do? Give the Emperor to me. I'm going to use him to hand the throne over to me. I want to be a female emperor. Qin Mu didn't answer. Suddenly, the door was slammed wide open as Granny C barged in with a sneer. If you don't give me the Emperor, I'll come and take him myself. She concentrated her gaze on what was happening and was left stunned. She saw that Qin Mu had planted the Emperor in the soil, and he was standing straight like a pine tree. Qin Mu was walking around Emperor Yanfeng while executing various techniques as he struck palm after palm towards the standing body. Earth Aeon Creation Technique? Spirit Creation Technique? There's also Ghost Creation Technique. Granny C looked at it once and saw that Qin Mu's hand techniques had myriad transformations. Each move and each form was incomparably clear as he executed the writings of creation in great educational Heavenly Devil scriptures to treat the injuries of Emperor Yanfeng. This was done because there was no other choice, seeing how they didn't have enough spirit pills and miraculous medicine. Thus, Qin Mu could only use creation techniques to turn back the creations and seize the profound theory to treat Emperor Yanfeng. Cult Master Qin, your Earth Aeon Creation Technique is wrong. Li Tianqing's rough voice came from Granny C's mouth as he sneered. It's not executed this way. A proper devil technique got executed messily by you, making it seem like a righteous technique. You're really throwing the face of our Heavenly Saint cult. After some time, he couldn't resist saying, Spirit creation technique is also wrong. How can it be used to save people? For you to use it to change the composition of his corporeal body. Absolutely disgraceful. Who uses ghost creation technique like you do? Using a perfectly all-right technique to stabilize his souls and spirits. Wait a minute. Interesting. Very interesting. He became more and more engrossed as he looked. Qin Mu's creation techniques had gone a different direction from his own, and these techniques that were clearly devilish had instead become grand and impressive. They had been clearly created to harm people, but he was using them to save people. Qin Mu used Earth Aeon creation technique to gather the Qi of Mother Earth, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, to nourish Emperor Yanfeng's primordial spirit. He used spirit creation technique to refine the hidden injuries in his body and used ghost creation technique to stabilize Emperor Yanfeng's souls and spirits. As the previous cult master, Li Tianxing had also cultivated these techniques, but he had taken the road of the devil path, which involved plundering the creation of heaven and earth and the creation of other people. Granny C's techniques of the devil path had also been taught by him. His eyesight was extremely shrewd and ruthless. He could see the road Qin Mu had taken was totally contrary to his. He seized from the outside while Qin Mu took from the inside. If one cultivated using Qin Mu's method, the speed might be slower, but their souls, spirits, primordial spirit, and physique would become incomparably stable. Both the body and the mind would be strong. The most wonderful point was the word creation in 7 writings of creation. This would make his souls, spirits, primordial spirit, physique, and divine treasures have quality upgrades. For example, aptitude. One's aptitude is determined at birth and is hard to change. However, cultivating Qin Mu's would allow one to use creation's techniques to change their own aptitude, to improve it for better and better. Li Tianxing was a great expert. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the sacred cult master of heavenly devil cult. When he saw the same techniques going down a different path, he couldn't help becoming engrossed in it. Every transformation in Qin Mu's moves had a huge attraction to him, and even though he wanted very much to kill Emperor Yanfeng and bring his skin to become the emperor, he still wanted to see more transformations from the creation techniques. Without him noticing, the crows of roosters sounded out, and rays of sunlight scattered in through the window. Li Tianxing sighed. You escaped death for a night. However, I'll definitely kill you guys tomorrow night. The body trembled, and Granny C woke up. She immediately asked, Mu'er, did the old devil harm you? Qin Mu also let out a sigh of relief, his body covered in stinky sweat. He shook his head and said, he was only engrossed in looking at my creation techniques and got muddled along the way. Granny, I need to rest for a while. I shall use other techniques of great educational heavenly devil scriptures to muddle him the upcoming night. When night came, Emperor Yanfeng's injuries were much better, and he woke up with a clear mind. Qin Mu let out a sigh of relief and said, Your Majesty, I'll undo the heavenly devil creation technique on your body and see if your body is able to hold on to your soul. Just as he undid heavenly devil creation technique, Emperor Yanfeng's body suddenly became hollow and collapsed to the ground. 2 souls and 2 spirits from his 3 souls and 7 spirits had flown out and got ready to leave for Yudu. Qin Mu immediately executed Soul Guide to guide them back into his body before frowning. Emperor Yanfeng's body was still too weak to hold onto his souls and spirits. Suddenly, a delicate laughter came from outside. Cult Master, I'm here again. If you have no new tricks, I'll kill the Emperor. Emperor Yanfeng said weakly, What demoness talks so charmingly? Qin Mu immediately sealed the man's 5 senses. His own body then trembled as he revealed the form of Saturn's sovereign, and the gate of heaven influence appeared behind his back. Granny C barged into the room this time and gave a cry of astonishment. Saturn Sovereign's Earth Marquis True technique? What's that on the gate? Why is there a book in your hand? Your Earth Marquis True technique is different from mine. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 262. The Emperor's Divine Treasures. Granny C was attracted to the gate of heaven influence and the scroll. As a matter of fact, Qin Mu also didn't understand the words on it. He could only read the words on the gate. He only knew one phrase in Yudu's language, and that was gate of heaven influence. For this phrase, he had been almost killed by Duqian Devil King. You want to learn? I can teach you, Qin Mu said calmly. Li Tianqing's voice came from Granny C's mouth as he sneered. Do I need you to teach? You're the cult master sacred teacher, and I'm also the cult master sacred teacher. Furthermore, I'm your senior. So where will I put my face if you teach me? Qin Mu smiled. But you don't know the true Saturn Sovereign's Earth Marquis true technique. Li Tianqing was pissed and rolled Granny's eyes flirtatiously at him. I'm the cult master sacred teacher. What's there I don't know? Qin Mu ignored him and stabilized his mind. That look was too powerful and had almost captivated him. He executed 9 heavens' eye-awakening skill, and layers of heavens opened in his eyes. When he looked at the emperor, he only saw his ruined divine treasures that were like ruined heaven and earth. Qin Mu gave a muffled shout, and the heart of his brows suddenly split open, revealing a third eye. This eye didn't seem like a corporeal eye of the human world, but that it had come from a world of gloom. It emanated a dark and sinister air that caused the light of the candle to instantly become dim. When this eye opened, the room seemed to enter another world which didn't look like the human world. Qin Mu used this eye to look at his patient and instantly saw Emperor Yanfeng's souls, spirits, primordial spirits. He then found where the main problem lay. One cultivates primordial spirit on celestial being realm. When their vital qi fuses with the souls and spirits, they would become the primordial spirit, which was also the god that stood tall behind the strong practitioners of celestial being realm. That was the primordial spirit, vital qi, and spirit. Emperor Yanfeng's primordial spirit stood on the divine bridge, looking like it wanted to cross to the god realm. Since his secret realms were crumbling, his primordial spirit, as well as his souls and spirits, were severely injured. With his souls and spirits in a mess and his primordial spirit unprotected, his 3 souls and 7 spirits were no longer whole. There was also a terrifying energy still bombarding his corporeal body, causing his soul to waver. Thus, even if Qin Mu managed to save his body, the emperor's souls and spirits wouldn't be able to remain in his body. Li Tianqing's imposing manner suddenly turned gloomy as he said resentfully, Though I've never learned this eye before, is this really the Earth Marquis true technique of great educational heavenly devil scriptures? Qin Mu closed his eyes and dispersed the form of Saturn's sovereign. He frowned as he walked to and fro while pondering. Li Tianqing held back his anger and quietly waited. Qin Mu suddenly clapped and smiled. What can I see if I only stay here? Why don't I enter the emperor's body to examine it in detail? Cult Master Li, follow me. Li Tianqing was shocked and asked suspiciously, How can you enter his body? Simple. There's a technique in great educational heavenly devil scriptures called phantom illusion technique, which hides a person in the shadow, concealing the form of the corporeal body. There's also a technique called heavenly mustard seed technique, which can shrink and expand the corporeal body. By executing both techniques together, we can shrink our body before transforming into a phantom to enter Emperor Yanfeng's body and examine his primordial spirit and divine treasures. Qin Mu took a glance at the woman nearby and said, You don't know. Li Tianqing laughed from anger and said, How would I not know? Qin Mu moved a step back and grabbed onto the woman's hand, pulling her towards Emperor Yanfeng. The two of them then executed both phantom illusion technique and heavenly mustard seed technique almost at the same time, and while they were sprinting towards Emperor Yanfeng, their bodies became smaller and smaller before turning into 2 black shadows on the floor which tunneled into the heart of Emperor Yanfeng's brows. Even though Emperor Yanfeng were frozen and his 5 senses were sealed by Qin Mu, he could still feel 2 black shadows moving around his body. Qin Mu and Li Tianqing paused when they came to his spirit embryo divine treasure. The two of them stood at the edge of it and looked ahead. Emperor Yanfeng's spirit embryo divine treasure had already been destroyed. His spirit embryo and spirit platform had crumbled, and the sky was filled with thousands of holes. An extremely disturbing crack was in one part of the sky, revealing a snow-white skull that was on the outside. There was fresh blood pouring into the spirit embryo divine treasure like a huge waterfall. Other than that, Qin Mu also saw a sword light flying to and fro in the spirit embryo divine treasure, destroying this divine treasure without any restraint. Dao Master's Dao Sword. Li Tianqing was astonished. That old Taoist is really remarkable. He had struck his sword will inside. Can you take away this sword will? Qin Mu asked. Li Tianqing chuckled. Why should I help you? Qin Mu smiled. You have seen so many true teachings of my great educational heavenly devil scriptures, so there should be reciprocation. Even if you don't help me, I can ask Granny C to help me tomorrow. Li Tianqing snorted and flew forward with his 10 fingers suddenly spread wide open. Instantly, threads of vital qi connected with each other and intersected to form a spatial sealing cage. The opposite angles of the cage connected with each other to form another spatial sealing cage within this cage. In the second one, a new one was soon formed, so on and so forth. It was literally endless. Li Tianqing threw this clean-cut ball out, and it collided with the sword will, which instantly vanished as it got sucked inside. Li Tianqing stretched his hand out to grab the cube back, then threw it up and down as he looked at Qin Mu with a pleased expression. Multiple sides spatial sealing technique, Qin Mu exclaimed. It's indeed ingenious. You may recognize it, but you might not be able to use it. Li Tianqing laughed. Qin Mu gave a smile and executed spatial sealing technique without any extra trouble. My cultivation is too weak, so I can't seal Dao Master's sword will. However, I've also dipped my hands into algebra, so I know how to set up spatial seals. Only my cultivation is inferior to yours. You and I are both cult master sacred teachers. That's why what I know won't be any less than what you know. It will only be more. Li Tianqing snorted, but since the sound was so feminine, people would only find it cute instead of being disgusted by it. Qin Mu breathed heavily in his heart and transformed into a fine shadow to leave the spirit embryo divine treasure and enter the 5 elements divine treasure. In that place, there were 5 huge Buddhas sitting in the shattered sky which replaced the stars of the 5 elements. Li Tianqing flicked his fingers, and 5 trails of devil qi transformed into 5 lotus flowers which flew out and landed under the bodies of the 5 huge Buddhas. In an instant, they became weak and their bodies withered away as blazing devil flames ignited. The 5 huge Buddhas instantly turned into ashes. Li Tianqing sneered. Do you know this as well? Qin Mu said, This is Red Lotus Devil Heart Mantra. This is my first time executing this mantra, but it won't be any inferior to yours. His vital qi transformed as he executed Red Lotus Devil Heart Mantra. With a flick of a finger, a red lotus flew out. Li Tianqing stared at it, and it was indeed Red Lotus Devil Heart Mantra. However, it was superior to his. The devil flame's red lotus that was formed by the devil qi he had flicked out earlier wasn't as pure as that of Qin Mu's red lotus karma fire. Yet, because of the limitation of his cultivation, the power of Red Lotus Devil Heart Mantra Qin Mu had executed was much weaker. The two of them then went to 6 Directions Divine Treasure and saw that it had also been crushed. Air was leaking out from everywhere, which made this place fresh and cool. There was still half a heaven hidden here with the Buddhas and gods attacking it, shattering the 6 directions. Li Tianqing couldn't resist saying, This emperor is hopeless. Each layer of his divine treasures is worse than the previous. Even if you save him, he will be a useless person. Is there a need for you to put in so much effort? On this journey, she had already recognized what Qin Mu, this cult master sacred teacher, was doing. Her opinion of him improved by a lot, and she felt that it wasn't worth it for him to put in so much effort in saving Emperor Yanfeng, which would become a useless person. Qin Mu shook his head. I have to save him for Heavenly Saint cult. Li Tianqing didn't ask any more questions and made her move to take away the remnants of Rulai's divine art in the 6 Directions divine treasure. Even though I'm no longer the sacred cult master, I wore that mantle once. I'm willing to do things that are beneficial to the sacred cult, she said in a low voice. Astonished, Qin Mu nodded silently. The two of them then came to 7 stars divine treasures and looked to where the sun and the moon should be hanging in the sky. The 2 had already been destroyed, and there were 2 divine swords hanging in their place. Those swords would tremble from time to time, and sword qi that filled the sky would instantly come down in all directions. Qin Mu was bewildered, and in a low voice, he said, 7 stars divine treasure. From its name, there should be 7 stars. 7 stars divine treasure has a sun and a moon, the twin stars. With the addition to the 5 elements of 5 elements divine treasure, it makes it 7 stars. Li Tianqing pointed out to him. Look down and you can see the 5 elements divine treasure. Qin Mu looked down and his heart trembled slightly. Below their feet was 5 elements divine treasure, and the 5 elements together with the sun and moon here formed the 7 stars. However, Emperor Yanfeng's 5 elements divine treasure had already been destroyed, and there were shocking cracks below their feet. The sky would crumble from time to time, looking very unstable. These 2 divine treasures are connected together, so once you cultivate to 7 stars divine treasure, you can see 5 elements and 7 stars together as one. If you cultivate to celestial being realm, you can see 6 directions outside spirit embryo. 5 elements are distributed in the sky, while the sun and moon of 7 stars hang at the topmost part. These are the poles of heaven and earth. Li Tianqing explained, giving him pointers. When it comes to life and death realm, darkness would appear from the land below your feet, which is the passage to Yudu. When you reach divine bridge, there will be a divine bridge all the way to heaven. At that time, you will not be far from becoming a god. She revealed a smile, but it was a cruel one. However, at that time you will realize that the bridge leading to heaven is broken. Broken. Your whole life of cultivation, determination, and long-lasting ideals will all be useless once you reach the end of your lifespan. Everything is empty. Everything is empty. Cult Master Li, calm down, Qin Mu said. Li Tianqing rolled her eyes at him in a feminine manner and couldn't resist asking, "Aren't you disappointed?" Qin Mu was bewildered. What's there to be disappointed about if you live your life to the fullest? Li Tianqing was stunned but then nodded. That's why I shall live my life to the fullest, to become the most beautiful woman in the world. Qin Mu's scalp turned numb. He didn't know if it was the excitement from Granny C or if it was him cultivating great educational heavenly devil scriptures that had made him dumb. They walked into Emperor Yanfeng's celestial being divine treasure, and Qin Mu finally saw how spirit embryo, 6 directions, 5 elements, and 7 stars formed the poles of heaven and earth which Li Tianqing had mentioned. Reaching life and death realm, he saw the darkness of Yudu beneath his feet. Finally, they came to the last place, divine bridge divine treasure. A divine bridge stretched across the sky and crossed life and death, sun and moon, 5 elements, 6 directions. It seemed like there was an incomparably bright and glorious heaven at the other end of the divine bridge where gods were waiting for them to move forward. Emperor Yanfeng's divine bridge, however, had already cracked in numerous places, and there were pieces crashing down from time to time, smashing straight through layers of divine treasures and into spirit embryo divine treasure. Li Tianqing looked around. The emperor is really hopeless. He's useless, so give his skin to me. I shall be the emperor and eternal peace will belong to our heavenly saint cult. Qin Mu shook his head. You aren't cut out to be the emperor. You are only suitable to bring disaster to all living things. Li Tianqing was angry and stared at him furiously. I will become the female emperor, and I'll grant you a consort. Qin Mu rolled his eyes, showing him his white eyeballs. Li Tianqing was stunned for a moment, then suddenly chuckled. Powerful demoness. Qin Mu immediately sealed his 5 senses to prevent himself from getting affected. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 263. I want to execute you. They swept away all the remnants of the divine arts left behind by Tao Master and Rulai, which gave Qin Mu an idea of how to continue treating Emperor Yanfeng. He calculated for a bit, then said, without the remnants of the divine arts, his souls and spirits can finally be stabilized. Even though the Emperor's divine treasures are crumbling, with enough spirit medicine, I can use phantom illusion technique and heavenly mustard seed technique to enter his divine treasures. If I refine the pills and medicines here, I might just be able to repair the injuries to his divine treasure. Though, he had never treated such injuries before, so he didn't have any confidence in being successful with his treatment. If there were only cracks in the divine treasures, he could still treat them, but Emperor Yanfeng's divine treasures were destroyed. Apothecary had taught him lots of medicinal knowledge, but there were no methods to treat these kinds of injuries among them. However, there were some herbs that were able to cure injuries to divine treasures, and great educational heavenly devil scriptures also had some techniques that could strengthen divine treasures. Qin Mu felt that if he could apply both of them together, there would be a chance. When the two of them left Emperor Yanfeng's divine treasures, the sky soon brightened. Granny C woke up while Li Tianxing fell into slumber. Qin Mu undid the heavenly devil creation technique and said, "Your Majesty, I'm going out to buy some herbs, so I might be gone for 3 to 5 days. During this period of time, don't go out of the room. There will be someone who will bring you your meals and place them at your door. When night comes, no matter what sound you hear, you can't leave the room. If someone asks you to just take a look, you can't that look." Emperor Yanfeng said weakly, "Minister Qin, to what kind of place have you brought me? It's so mysterious." Qin Mu had a grave expression. "Your Majesty, this is where my granny and Li Tianxing is staying. You just need to know that the one looking for you at night will definitely be Li Tianxing. If you look out, you will die. However, that won't be all. The entire Eternal Peace Empire will fall with you as well. If you walk out of this door, you'll surely die." Emperor Yanfeng heard his serious tone and smiled. "Don't worry, I understand. I'm not that curious of a person." Qin Mu closed the door and wielded his brush soaked with ink. His body trembled as he transformed into the human-headed and snake-bodied Saturn Sovereign and circulated his magic power. When he raised his brush, he drew a gate on the door and wrote "Gate of Heaven Influence" in the language of Yudu. His body then returned back to normal, and he wrote a sentence on the ground which said, "This is the gate that's created from Saturn Sovereign's Earth Marquee True technique from great educational heavenly devil scriptures. If you can read it, you can go in. If you can't, you shall stay outside." Qin Mu put away his brush and ink before telling Granny C, "Granny, don't touch this door at all cost. When you send meals to the Emperor, send them in with a bamboo pole. Never walk through this door." Granny C examined the words on the door and blinked. "This door?" Qin Mu also blinked, not saying anything. Granny C understood. "I will definitely not go in." Qin Mu walked out of the courtyard and jumped onto the dragon Qilin's back. Turning his head back to the room Emperor Yanfeng was in, he thought to himself, "It's fine if Li Tianxing understands the language of Yudu, but if he doesn't recognize it and tries to barge in, his soul will be pulled into Yudu and belong to Earth Count. Granny will also be free then." Emperor Yanfeng felt much better, and he could already move around with difficulty. However, he strictly kept to Qin Mu's words and never left the room. When it was lunch, Granny C would use a bamboo pole to send a basket into the room. Emperor Yanfeng would squat down and open the door slightly, taking the basket in. When he was done eating, he would place the basket back at the door, never going out at all. Ever since he had become the emperor, it was the first time he was feeling so sullen. After dinner, he suddenly heard melodious giggling from the other side of the door. The sound seemed to penetrate into the depths of his brains, and it was indescribably pleasant to hear. Emperor Yanfeng was entranced and felt that none of the 3,000 beauties in his palace had such a voice that could send a man's heart racing. Since Cult Master Qin isn't around, then I shall play around with the emperor. If I'm happy, I might just skin him to make clothing and go to the capital city to become the female emperor. Emperor Yanfeng was fearful of the words, yet he found the voice pleasant, messing up his heart. He wanted to open the door to take a look at the appearance of this woman, but then he remembered Qin Mu's words and thought to himself, "This is Cult Master Li Tianxing using the devil voice to lure me out. That old devil is actually mimicking the voice of a woman, truly shameless." He blocked his ears, but that charming voice seemed to have already latched onto his brain, making it hard for him to forget it. Humph! That rascal actually dared to test me, truly not knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Although I really don't recognize these words. We have both cultivated Saturn Sovereign's Earth Marquee True technique. And I don't believe I'm inferior to him. The woman outside the door tried to solve the marvel of the words on the door and practiced Earth Marquee True technique over and over again, yet saw no success. Without noticing it, she had used up quite a lot of time, and Emperor Yanfeng had also finally fallen asleep after being anxious for a whole night. When the next day came, it was the same as the previous day. And when night came, That woman came back to solve the meaning of the words on the door while Emperor Yanfeng almost grew a devil in his heart from her voice alone. He kept hearing a sweet and charming voice calling him to open the door to take a look. When the third night came, that woman grumbled angrily, "I can cultivate it into understanding, nor can I solve it. Why should I give up? If I can just barge in and kill the emperor to strip his skin, why do I still have to solve some puzzle?" Emperor Yanfeng became alarmed. But then the woman said, "No, no." When Cult Master Qin used this technique, a third eye appeared and the room suddenly turned dim while the light turned green. It didn't look like the human world. "There's something strange about this door. It might lead to another world if I go through it. The brat is very crafty. He must be thinking of scheming something." Emperor Yanfeng was astonished. "This woman is clever. No, it should Cult Master Li, who is a wily old fox. However, isn't Cult Master Li an old man? Why does he have to imitate a female voice which is so charming?" He couldn't resist wanting to peek and thought to himself, "Just a glance won't harm me, right?" Just as he was about to peek through the slit in the window, a dragon roar came from outside. Qin Mu walked in with great strides and made him drop the thought of peeking. "Cult Master Li didn't go through the door? Could you not know the words on the gate? Do you admit you have cultivated great educational heavenly devil scriptures wrongly? What's your problem? The meaning of the words on the door is Gate of Heaven Influence. I'll teach you." When he finished saying that, he taught this Yudu phrase to Li Tianxing and said, "Cult Master Li, now you that have learned it, you can go through the door." Cult Master Li chuckled. "I have learned this Yudu phrase and understood the meaning of the words on the door, but does that mean I will be safe after going through?" Cult Master Qin, "I'm also the Cult Master Sacred Teacher, and a crafty person. You can't trick me." Qin Mu shook his head and walked up. He walked through the door and scraped the words on the door off with his vital qi before telling Emperor Yanfeng, "Your Majesty, I have gone to a few cities to buy herbs, but since all kinds of disasters had befallen people, there were few herbs in the medicine shops. I could only buy a few herbs and I don't know how effective they will be." "Minister Qin, just do what you can," said Emperor Yanfeng. "Did Minister Qin hear any news after going out this time? Your Majesty has died." Qin Mu looked at him and said, "Neither too fast nor too slow. News from the capital city say that your Majesty overworked yourself by handling political affairs and died in the process. The Crown Prince is currently preparing for your funeral and the entire empire is grieving." Emperor Yanfeng was slightly shook, then said with a smile that was not a smile, "I have already died? Truly, my good son. Good son, what about General of Heavenly Strategies and the rest? Are they still alive?" While preparing the herbs to refine spirit pills, Qin Mu said, "In that battle outside Bazhou City, the people of my Heavenly Saint cult only focused on saving the Emperor, so they had teleported away after you left. General of Heavenly Strategies, High Official, Situ, Sikong, and the rest were all captured. Dao Master and Rulai did not do anything to them, just handed them over to the Crown Prince. They are the heads of influential families that have great power in the capital city, so your Majesty doesn't need to worry about their safety. The Crown Prince still requires the support of those influential families." "My good son," Emperor Yanfeng sighed. The power that General of Heavenly Strategies and the rest wielded was great. They held over half of the capital's power, along with its military and many other levels of society. If the Crown Prince wanted to ascend to the throne, he required their support. The empire can't go on without a ruler, so the Crown Prince's ascension should be set on the first half of the third month. 6th of the third month is an auspicious date, so the Crown Prince should be ascending to the throne then. With the support of Dao Sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery, him becoming the emperor is firmly set in place. Whoever dares to object will be eradicated with their whole family. Where's Imperial Preceptor? I wouldn't have fallen into such plight if he was around. Imperial Preceptor has gone out on a honeymoon and there's still no news of him. When I went out this time, I also met quite a number of scouts searching for traces of your Majesty. I heard that the Crown Prince ordered to find your body even if you're dead." Qin Mu executed phantom illusion technique and tunneled into the Emperor's divine treasures. In Spirit Embryo Divine Treasure, He used the medicinal energy of the spirit pills. But even though it dissolved, the spirit embryo divine treasure wasn't repaired. The effects of the medicine were minimal. Qin Mu frowned and changed a few kinds of spirit pills, but all of their effects were similarly minimal. He then transformed into a black shadow and flew out of the heart of Emperor Yanfeng's brows. He revealed his true form as he landed on the ground and paced to and fro. Suddenly, he said, "Your Majesty, your injuries are hard to treat. I can treat the ones on your body and even your soul, but I can't deal with those on your divine treasures. However, my grandpa apothecary should be able to treat you. Is your Majesty willing to follow me to great ruins?" Hope was renewed in Emperor Yanfeng's heart. "This apothecary is..." Qin Mu hesitated for a moment before saying honestly, "Jade Face Poison King." Emperor Yanfeng's complexion turned black, and he said angrily, "Jade Face Poison King?" He was the emperor and Empress Dowager was his mother. However, Jade Face Poison King had an unclear relationship with her, and before Apothecary's true identity was revealed, he was known as Jade Face Playboy that had lovers all around the world. Even reputable nuns had unclear relationships with him. Emperor Yanfeng naturally knew about this, but it wasn't convenient for him to say anything. He had once ordered people to assassinate Jade Face Poison King to get rid of Empress Dowager's gigolo. Part of the reason why Grandpa Apothecary was forced to hide in great ruins was due to his efforts. He was absolutely unwilling to meet Jade Face Poison King. "Minister Qin, I'm not going to great ruins. My unfilial son is ascending to the throne and spoiling the reform I had worked on for the past 200 years. I can't let this foundation be destroyed in a day," Emperor Yanfeng said solemnly. "We shall go to the capital city." Qin Mu's heart trembled slightly, and he took a glance at him. "Your Majesty is sure you want to go to the capital city?" Emperor Yanfeng nodded. "The capital city is where the dragon veins gather, and my Ling family's 9 dragons monarch technique can cultivate twice as fast there. I just might be able to borrow the chi of the 9 dragons to reconstruct my divine treasures. The blood and sweat of Imperial Preceptor, and I can't be allowed to go to waste. As long as I return to the capital city, I can depose my unfilial son." Qin Mu pondered it for a moment, then smiled. "Pardon me." He took out a pig slaughtering knife and stripped the emperor of his crown and yellow robe. Emperor Yanfeng's face changed drastically. "Minister Qin, what are you doing?" Qin Mu pressed down on his head, and the pig slaughtering knife went scraping. After some time, Emperor Yanfeng's head was bald, without a strand of hair remaining. Qin Mu then took a few sticks of incense and lighted them up before pressing them down onto Emperor Yanfeng's scalp. He was in pain as his scalp sizzled from being burnt, forming scabs. Qin Mu sized him up and smiled. "Excellent. Now you still need a set of Buddhist robes and grass shoes as well as prayer beads. Your beard also needs to be shaved." After he had said that, he pushed the emperor down and cleanly shaved his beard off. Emperor Yanfeng was furious, but he couldn't retaliate. After a moment, he was fresh and cool. He was dressed up into a yellow robe of an eminent monk, and the emperor that naturally exuded dignity and power was gone. Qin Mu then fetched a brush and adjusted the color of the ink before painting on Emperor Yanfeng's face. The man wanted to retaliate, but his movements were immediately sealed. He could only stand there stoically and let Qin Mu do whatever he wanted. Once Qin Mu was done painting, he fetched a mirror and placed it in front of him with a smile. "Does your Majesty still recognize yourself?" Emperor Yanfeng looked at the person in the mirror and saw a middle-aged monk. There was a scar that stretches all the way from his left eyes to his nose bridge, passing by his right cheek and all the way to the bottom of his left ear. He gave people the feel of a fiendishly ill monk that ate vegetarian food and prayed to Buddha during his free time while committing murder and arson when he wasn't feeling well. Qin Mu took off his knife sheaths and placed them on Emperor Yanfeng's back. Emperor Yanfeng grunted and collapsed to the ground. He couldn't move and cried out, "Bones, my bones are cracking. Take them away quickly. I can't breathe." "Oh, I've forgotten your Majesty's cultivation is crippled and your body isn't like before." Qin Mu immediately took the 2 pig slaughtering knives off and took a plank from outside. He carved 2 wooden knives and painted them with metallic paint. making a clear distinction between black and white. He then made 2 knife sheaths and the 2 wooden pig slaughtering knives on Emperor Yanfeng's back. Qin Mu sized him up and smiled. "Your Majesty can now leave with me." Emperor Yanfeng pulled out the 2 wooden knives and said angrily, "Minister Qin, how dare you make a fool out of me? I want to execute you. Stretch your head out." Qin Mu stretched his head out with a smile. "Your Majesty, please." Emperor Yanfeng ruthlessly chopped at his neck twice and started panting in exhaustion. Qin Mu then passed his own pig slaughter knife over and said, "Your Majesty can use a real knife." Emperor Yanfeng's hands grabbed onto the handle of the knife, but he couldn't raise it up no matter what. He threw the knife on the ground in anger and said angrily, "I'll note it down for now. Let us go." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 264. The 2 Heroes of Eternal Peace. Qin Mu bade farewell to Granny Sea and brought the Emperor to walk while the Dragon Qilin followed behind. Qin Mu taught Emperor Yanfeng's spirit creation technique from great educational heavenly devil scriptures before imparting his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique to him. Cultivate these 2 techniques together as you walk. It'll strengthen your body at the minimum, while it can also be beneficial to your injuries. Emperor Yanfeng was skeptical and tried to cultivate his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique and spirit creation technique. His complexion turned for the better and he smiled. "This technique is good to actually be able to cultivate while walking. I feel that my strength has recovered. Cultivate it first then. When you achieve small attainment, the injuries on your body will heal and your physique will become stronger. I will then teach your ghost creation technique to cultivate your soul so it could stabilize. We can then use medicine to treat the soul and attack one problem from 2 angles at the same time. By that time, the injuries on your soul will completely recover." Qin Mu was suddenly lost in thought. Now that I taught the techniques of great educational heavenly devil scriptures to the Emperor, should he join our heavenly saint cult? If so, what position should I give him? He took a glance at Emperor Yanfeng while harboring evil designs. "I'm still lacking a heavenly king. If I could make the Emperor join us and become the heavenly king of heavenly saint cult, the entire Eternal Peace Empire would become our heavenly saint cults." Emperor Yanfeng trained hard, and his body became stronger. He managed to cultivate some vital qi, but without divine treasures, there was simply a limit to his cultivation. Qin Mu also cultivated at a leisurely pace. When he executed Overlord Body 3 elixir technique, 5 beams of light shone down from the sky. Those were the 5 elements in his body connecting with the stars of the 5 elements, drawing the star power to raise his cultivation. Emperor Yanfeng was slightly stunned. He's still on 5 elements realm? He always thought that Qin Mu was already a divine arts practitioner of 6 directions realm. After all, Qin Mu's abilities were already on par with people of that level. His cultivation was also no inferior to divine arts practitioners of 6 directions realm, so he didn't think that Qin Mu would still be on 5 elements realm. Great educational heavenly devil scriptures of heavenly devil cult are truly extraordinary. Emperor Yanfeng exclaimed in admiration to himself, but he didn't know that Qin Mu's vital qi had mainly come from Overlord Body 3 elixir technique, the exact same technique Emperor Yanfeng was currently cultivating. Qin Mu's cultivation had indeed reached the peak of 5 elements realm and wasn't far from 6 directions realm. He was just waiting for the 5 elements star sovereigns to stabilize first before trying to break through. The 2 of them walked for 4 days and spent their nights in the open. When they reached the next city, Qin Mu brought Emperor Yanfeng inside and bought some herbs. It was the first time Emperor Yanfeng had suffered so much in his life. Both of his feet were filled with blisters and abrasions. In the inn, Qin Mu placed him in a wooden tub to soak in medicinal water for a night. The emperor fell asleep in the wooden tub. When he woke up the next morning, he discovered that the blisters on his feet had all vanished and his body had become much lighter. He clicked his tongue in wonder. The 2 of them continued on their way and came to the boundary of Prey Prefecture. There, they could see many divine arts practitioners chasing after the villagers, whipping and scolding them. This land belongs to our Prey Mountain sect. Those divine art practitioners were most likely disciples of Prey Mountain sect, and what they cultivated was lightning skills. They could control a formation to strike everywhere with lightning, so they herded the villagers into one spot. The emperor has ordered to reinstate the system of our ancestors, so the land of sex will belong to sex. From now on, there's no need to provide for the empire, only give offerings to Prey Mountain sect. A villager was unwilling to accept this and was struck to death by a bolt of lightning just as he started to argue. Qin Mu stopped and observed, frowning slightly. Emperor Yanfeng had a black face and said coldly, "To go against the tide." They passed by other prefectures and saw the power of sex returning like ashes taking flame once more. They were seizing territories and plundering the rich. As they split the territories, more chaos was added to the already chaotic lands. The snow disaster had already caused major damage. Thus, the addition of sex making a comeback and seizing territories, catching commoners to be their farming slaves was adding oil to the fire. The authorities everywhere that had been sending disaster relief had also stopped. The numbers of people who were starving and freezing to death escalated to the point that they could not be counted. Emperor Yanfeng was solemn and worked even harder to cultivate, trying to repair his divine treasures and regain his cultivation. When they came to Harmony Prefecture, Qin Mu came to the city lord's manor and the magistrate of Harmony Prefecture came to welcome him. He took a glance at Emperor Yanfeng but didn't recognize him. His gaze landed on Qin Mu and said, "Cult Master, talk inside." Qin Mu walked into the manor, allowing the dragon Qilin find a place to rest. When he heard the emperor's stomach rumble in hunger, he said, "Clean clothes hall master, give this bald. Give this senior brother a bowl of rice to eat." The magistrate of Harmony Prefecture was the clean clothes hall master of Heavenly Saint Cult and was called Duanmu Jing. He waved his hand so a servant would bring the emperor to eat. With a smile, he asked, "Why is Cult Master bringing along an eminent monk?" Qin Mu didn't explain and instead asked, "What's the situation in the capital?" "Not too good," said Duanmu Jing. "Most of the Taoists and monks from Tao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery have gone to the capital. Tao Master and Rulai passed down their decree to confer the crown prince as peaceful emperor, who would ascend to the throne on the 6th of the 3rd month. At the moment, there are still scouts of the crown prince wandering about, executing anyone who looks like the emperor." Qin Mu nodded quietly. This was close to what he had expected. Duanmu Jing continued, "Also, now that the crown prince is ruling the empire, he has gained a lot of power. Most of the influential families have been taken under the wing by Buddhists and Taoists. Some of the influential families in the capital have already changed sides while monks and Taoists stayed in others and refused to leave. These influential families don't dare to fall out with them, so they can only let them stay. The current capital city can be said to belong to the people of all trades, with crooks mixed in with the honest folk. It could be said to no longer be under the rule of the emperor. The crown prince had also issued a decree to reinstate the system set by the ancestors, returning the lands that once belonged to the sects back to them. The other territories will belong to eternal peace. Also, Duanmu Jing hesitated, then said, "An envoy came from Wolf Store Country to talk about the war at the borders and make peace with the crown prince. He ceded 16 prefectures to Wolf Store Country. An envoy also came from Barbarian D Empire, and they are discussing ceding lands as compensation. It's really easy to squander the family fortune." Qin Mu smiled. This crown prince is too stupid and cowardly to be an emperor. Duanmu Jing was somewhat puzzled. Qin Mu showed no signs of being angry. On the contrary, he acted like there was nothing wrong. He didn't know that, however, that Qin Mu had never treated himself as a citizen of Eternal Peace Empire. From the start until now, he was always a person abandoned by the gods of Great Ruins, so there was no need for him to be angry. Ascension on the 6th of the 3rd month, truly an auspicious date that's suitable for murder. Qin Mu asked, "Have you found any news regarding Imperial Preceptor?" "We have found him." Qin Mu's spirit was aroused, and he fetched a few slips of paper. "Hall Master, prepare the herbs written on these slips of paper and store them in Venerate Prefecture City." Duanmu Jing acknowledged the command. Qin Mu called Emperor Yanfeng and the dragon Qilin over. "Let us leave the city." Emperor Yanfeng said in a panic, "I still haven't eaten to my fill." Qin Mu smiled. I'll bring you to see Imperial Preceptor and get some food on the way. Emperor Yanfeng immediately placed the steamed bun down, and his expression became solemn. He followed silently behind the youth. After a moment, he said, I would like to ask him where exactly he had gone these days. Qin Mu immediately brought him on the back of the dragon Qilin, then leaped up to stand on the head of the dragon Qilin himself. The dragon Qilin stepped on the fire clouds and sprinted through the sky. Cold wind welcomed Emperor Yanfeng in the face, making him sneeze continuously. Blazing flames suddenly ignited around Qin Mu's body, and Emperor Yanfeng felt much better. The dragon Qilin sprinted for 2 days before Qin Mu signaled this strange beast to descend. They were in the mountains that were piping hot. There were multicolored lights shining in the valley, but the steam evaporated as they traveled up. God's ray. Emperor Yanfeng has a grim expression as he sniffed the air and said, Blood scent. There's blood of a god in the valley. Qin Mu brought him into a village and there was indeed a blood lake there. Beside it was a small wooden house, behind which was a small river. The river water was slightly warm from being boiled by the god's blood, and a woman wearing snow-white sable fur stood beside the river. Her stomach was slightly bulging. Beside her feet was a middle-aged man who was holding a wooden club and smacking clothes on a stone board. Beside him was a bamboo basket with washed clothes. Qin Mu jumped down from the back of the dragon Qilin, and Emperor Yanfeng followed after him. However, his legs weren't steady, and he went sprawling on the floor. The couple heard the sound and turned around to have a look. Qin Mu had a smile on his face as he went forward. Couldn't you have helped me up? Emperor Yanfeng got to his feet and hurried forward. The middle-aged man placed his wooden club down and wiped his damp hands on his shirt. He stood up beside the woman and smiled at Qin Mu and the emperor who was walking over with a pale face. Imperial Preceptor. Emperor Yanfeng's footsteps became faster and faster, and just as he was about to criticize Imperial Preceptor, he suddenly noticed bloodstains on Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's chest. His complexion wasn't good as well. The emperor was greatly shaken and shed tears. My Imperial Preceptor, how did you land in such a state? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor welcomed the emperor and noticed that he had lost all his cultivation. He was equally sorrowful in his heart. How is it any different from your majesty? The woman immediately said, You are also injured. Don't throw your mental state in disorder. Qin Mu was stunned. The two strongest practitioners of Eternal Peace Empire were actually both severely injured. Heavenly Saint Cult Master pays his respects to Imperial Preceptor's wife. Qin Mu greeted the woman. Imperial Preceptor's wife saw the emperor's bald head and was bewildered. She immediately said, Don't just stand there. Come into the house to have a seat. After I left Little Jade Capital, I wanted to investigate the origin of the natural disaster and met a god who was holding a bottle gourd in his hand. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said indifferently in the small wooden house. The natural disaster was released from his bottle gourd. He got injured in our fight, but my injuries are more severe. With my wife being pregnant, we decided to stay here for a period of time. He had said it so simply, but one could imagine how fierce that battle must have been. Emperor Yanfeng checked the injuries on his body and looked at Qin Mu with inquiry. Qin Mu examined the man and shook his head. The injuries left behind by a god contain the will of a god inside, so I can't cure the root of the injuries. If you want to cure the root, I will have to return to the village and request Grandpa Apothecary's help. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said, I knew you couldn't cure the root of the problem, so I didn't go and find you. My injuries now are too severe, so I can't return to the capital city. Otherwise, I would surely die. I can't let others know I'm injured. But I never expected your majesty to. The two middle-aged men looked each other in the eyes and suddenly laughed out loud in unison. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor laughed until he started coughing endlessly. Emperor Yanfeng looked outside and asked, The blood lake outside? Left behind by that god. He was very strong and suffered some superficial wounds. The injuries on Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's chest opened up again, and Qin Mu applied some dragon saliva on him. But just as the wound was healed, It was once again torn apart by the remnant of the divine art the god had hidden in the wound. This kind of injury could no longer be cured by medicinal stones. Even if it were spirit pills that could allow a person to come back to life, they still wouldn't be able to remove the remnant of the god's divine art. Qin Mu pondered for a moment and took out a sword pellet that Mute had gifted him. He executed it gently, and sword lights appeared. Qin Mu pushed them forward, stabbing them around Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's wound. Imperial Preceptor's wife gave a low gasp while Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and Emperor Yanfeng didn't move at all. Qin Mu stretched his index finger out, and dense vital qi swirled like a cloud at the tip of his finger. When he gently tapped the sword pellet, a whoosh sounded, and a sword light shot out from the sword pellet, piercing through the house and into the blood lake. Boom! The blood lake trembled violently and exploded with a world-shaking bang. After 3 booms, the sword light from the sword pellet was shattered by the tremors and became smaller. Divine Physician's miraculous hands are truly ingenious. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor sighed with admiration. To actually use the power of the god's blood to counter the remnant of the god's divine art. Qin Mu applied the dragon's saliva once more, and the wound no longer bled. He said, "I can't guide the other divine arts in your body out. Your Majesty, Imperial Preceptor, there are 2 paths now. The first will be me bringing you guys to Great Ruins to treat your injuries, while the second is to head to the capital. You guys can choose what you want to do." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked at Emperor Yanfeng, and they seemed to know each other's thoughts as they said in unison, "The capital!" Qin Mu pulled out his pig-slaughtering knife and pressed Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's head on the table. Imperial Preceptor's wife cried out in astonishment, "Cult Master Qin, what are you doing?" Emperor Yanfeng rubbed his bald head and said, "Madam, you will know when you look at me." Qin Mu's hands were nimble, and he shaved Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor bald in a blink of an eye. He then took a few sticks of incense to burn a few scabs on his head. He then took out a yellow Buddhist robe from his Taotai sack with the ease of a routine. With a smile, he said, "I had made an extra set which for Imperial Preceptor. Please wait a minute. Let me draw a green birthmark on half of Imperial Preceptor's face." After he was done with Imperial Preceptor, he turned to Imperial Preceptor's wife. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor immediately said, "Cult Master, my wife is pregnant. In such a freezing weather, if she has no hair, in that case, she shall be a Taoist nun." Qin Mu took out a Taoist robe and handed it over to the woman. He then suddenly blinked and smiled at them all. "That's right. Do the 3 of you want to enter my cult? My Heavenly Saint cult feeds well, and if you have no skills, we can teach you handicrafts to make a living. I assure you guys won't starve to death with us." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 265, The Fourth Heavenly King. The Emperor and Imperial Preceptor didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This devil cult master was really daring and had no reserve being the devil cult master of Heavenly Devil Cult. He actually wanted to pull the Emperor and Imperial Preceptor into his Heavenly Devil Cult. If your injuries aren't healed, you won't be able to seize back the throne. And learning handicraft from our Heavenly Saint cult, you could at least feed your family, Qin Mu persuaded. Furthermore, if you enter the cult now, I can give you guys very high positions like the Heavenly King or Elder, while if you want to join after you are completely crippled and unsavable, I can at most make you incense masters and only a vice at that. Madam, help me persuade them. Imperial Preceptor's wife smiled but didn't say anything. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said indifferently, "If I join, I want to be the cult master." Emperor Yanfeng nodded. "Me too." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said, "If you're the cult master, I'll assist you." Qin Mu's eyes lit up. Emperor wants to be the cult master? Emperor Yanfeng was flabbergasted. He totally didn't expect Qin Mu to actually have the plan to give up the seat of Heavenly Devil Cult Master. If the Emperor became the Heavenly Devil Cult Master, wouldn't Eternal Peace Empire be part of his Heavenly Devil Cult? This was truly a hot potato that he couldn't pick up. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor also got a headache and looked secretly toward Emperor Yanfeng, signaling him to not take. Imperial Preceptor's wife laughed and said, "Cult Master Qin, they aren't willing, But I am. I wonder what kind of position Cult Master could give me. Qin Mu's eyes lit up, and he exclaimed secretly at the cleverness of this woman. She had broken the silence to prevent Imperial Preceptor and the Emperor from becoming awkward. If Madame joins the cult, I can give you a sinecure. Qin Mu smiled. Does Madame know embroidery? How about the incense master of Embroidery Hall? All right. The young married woman then smiled and pulled Imperial Preceptor to one side and said in a low voice, Husband, why do you have to reject Cult Master Qin? What are the odds of winning by going back to the capital city this time with His Majesty? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was silent for a moment, then said, Everyone in the world supports the reform and 70 to 80% of the civil and military officials in the Imperial Court are the men of His Majesty and I. When we return to the capital city, we can definitely execute the rebels and seize back the throne. Imperial Preceptor's wife smiled. Do you really think so? Won't Great Thunderclap Monastery and Dao Sect stop you? If it's you, you might be able to defend yourself against Rulai and Dao Master, but will His Majesty be able to defend himself against them? Qin Mu nodded lightly and smiled. There are Taoists and monks staying in the houses of all the kings, dukes, and ministers. They are all chanting Dharma or reciting Taoist scriptures. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was silent, and his wife pushed Qin Mu away to continue in a low voice. The other two big sacred grounds are watching your people, and those that are closed to you are either under house arrest or locked in prison. Now, you can only borrow power from Cult Master Qin. And to borrow someone's power, you need to make them feel at ease. Qin Mu moved over again and was about to say something when Imperial Preceptor's wife pushed him away. Imperial Preceptor pondered it for a bit, then walked over to Qin Mu. Heavenly Saint Cult lacks a heavenly king? Qin Mu nodded. The fourth heavenly king. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor then said, Let me be this fourth heavenly king. However, His Majesty can never have any connections with Heavenly Saint Cult. Your Majesty, I shall join His Heavenly Saint Cult. Emperor Yanfeng was stunned, but after quite a while, he said slowly, Sorry to put Imperial Preceptor at such an inconvenience. Qin Mu revealed a smile and said to Emperor Yanfeng, Your Majesty seems to have a misunderstanding regarding our Heavenly Saint Cult. We aren't a cult, and our philosophy is the everyday use of common people, and what we carry out is the path of the saint. This reform of Your Majesty and Imperial Preceptor has similar ideals. Imperial Preceptor's wife smiled. Cult Master, we should be on our way. There's no need to impart cult's teachings to His Majesty since it's impossible for him to join our Heavenly Saint Cult. Imperial Preceptor's wife went to sit on the back of the Dragon Qilin while Qin Mu, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, and the Emperor walked below. The two people executed Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that Qin Mu had taught them to recover some vital qi. These two people were like ascetic monks. Their footsteps weren't fast and they walked with great effort, so they reached Venerate Prefecture only after close to 3 days. Heavenly Devil Cult in Venerate Prefecture had already prepared the herbs, and Qin Mu could finally treat the injuries in Emperor Yanfeng's soul. Imperial Preceptor's external injuries were all healed, while the remnants of the divine arts left behind by the god in his body were not something Qin Mu could guide out. The remnants of the god's divine arts were extremely powerful. But if Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor could refine them, it would no longer be too troublesome for Qin Mu to cure him. The crucial point was that Imperial Preceptor couldn't mobilize his magic power. The remnants were hidden in his body and divine treasures, so he had to use his own magic power to suppress them. If he wasn't careful, he might just trigger the power of those divine arts. Neither the Emperor nor Imperial Preceptor can fight. Qin Mu sighed ruefully to himself. The two strongest practitioners of Eternal Peace Empire had both become sickly people that required his care and protection. As for himself, he was continuously cultivating without a break. As long as he was walking, Overlord Body 3 elixir technique was subconsciously executed and the 5 beams of star power from the stars would come pouring down. While they were on their way, Qin Mu also trained his sword skills diligently, practicing the 2 forms of sword skills village chief had taught him again and again, trying to perfect them. When Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor saw these 2 moves from Sword Picture, he gave a soft cry of astonishment and couldn't resist taking a few more looks. Cult Master, which elder taught you this? My village's village chief, the eldest one. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor pondered over it for a moment, then said, You are trying to incorporate the 3 basic sword forms that I founded into these 2 sword skills? They are already perfect, so adding my basic sword forms would disrupt the balance. The power is increased, but many flaws have appeared. Why did you do this? Qin Mu executed Sword of Founding Emperor Sea of Blood and suddenly had a feeling of sorrow. Sword of Founding Emperor, Sea of Blood, mountains and rivers exist in a vast and obscure heart, but when looking around left and right, there are no more people donning the clothes of homeland. This was a lonely reminiscence of one's homeland, the long-gone martyrs. It had the mood of sorrow and heroism. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor picked up a branch and said, There are still numerous flaws in your moves, so why don't I feed you some moves? Qin Mu's eyes lit up and he smiled. Please guide me. I dare not. Qin Mu also fetched a branch, and the 2 of them used tree branches as swords. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor attacked while Qin Mu used Sword Picture to defend. However, after just a moment, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had broken through a flaw and destroyed Sword treading mountains and rivers. Qin Mu pondered for a long time. The flaw Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had pointed out was different from what Village Chief had pointed out. Both of them were grandmasters in sword skills, but the path each of them took was different. Village Chief's sword skills had a passionate and intense feeling while Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's moves were calm. It was like he was opening a door, pushing forward the reform to open up new horizons. Their philosophies were different, so their sword skills were naturally different as well. Getting pointers from them allowed Qin Mu to receive different benefits. Village Chief's pointers had pushed Qin Mu into exhausting his knowledge, to the point his foundation wasn't enough to continue improving this 2 moves. However, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's pointers opened up a new path for him, making him able to continue improving his sword skills. They cultivated as they walked, and Qin Mu's comprehension of his sword increased more and more. He felt like his sword skills were about to cross to another level, but no matter what he did, there was always a veil preventing him from crossing over. No need to practice anymore. No matter how much you practice, there won't be any improvements anymore, said Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. If you want to break through, you will need your own enlightenment. Qin Mu was puzzled, but Emperor Yanfeng, who was beside him, understood what Imperial Preceptor was saying and sighed ruefully. Another step further and you'll be a little grandmaster. Minister Qin, to reach such a level at such a young age. When I reached that step back then, I was already 57 years old. I cultivated 9 Dragons Monarch technique to draw the Qi of the 9 dragons, which resulted in boundless vital Qi. Only when I felt the movement of the dragon Qi under the earth and the general situation of the world that was bustling with unpredictable activity did I break through in one go. You're some 40 years faster than me. Qin Mu smiled. Your Majesty, what's the expertise of your 9 Dragons Monarch technique? My expertise is transformation, Emperor Yanfeng said solemnly. If you want to learn, I can teach you. Before me, 9 Dragons Monarch technique was a technique that was only proficient in spells, but after it landed in my hands, any spells, sword techniques, corporeal body divine arts could be executed. Why? Because dragons signify transformation. They can be big and small, visible and invisible. They can soar into the sky and also dive into the deep sea, hide in the abyss and lay in the fields. They can move clouds and bring rain. They can burn the sky with a raging inferno, and they can control a tempest. Do you want to learn it? He thought that Qin Mu would reject because he was the devil cult master of Heavenly Devil Cult, a reputable figure. That's why he was caught off guard when Qin Mu said without a thought, yes. Emperor Yanfeng was stunned and suddenly laughed out loud. Oh well, who says 9 Dragons Monarch technique is the technique of our Ling family and can't be imparted outside? I'll teach you. Imperial Preceptor's wife looked at Emperor Yanfeng in astonishment while Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had a calm expression. His Majesty is such a person, heroic and candid. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to use me. I've already seen the original copy of 9 Dragons Monarch technique more than 10 times. Emperor Yanfeng taught Qin Mu 9 Dragons Monarch technique. how to circulate his qi, as well as how to operate the qi of the 9 dragons. This technique was different from Overlord Body 3 elixir technique, and it turned one majestic and imposing if they executed it. At the same time, it was full of changes, and one's every movement contained the mighty force of heaven and earth. 9 Heavens Divine Dragon Shroud is a spell that can transform into 9 true dragons, which can hide in clouds to attack the enemy. Look! Emperor Yanfeng aroused his vital qi, and a palm-sized cloud came out 3 inches from the top of his head. A few dragon qi that were fine like earthworms bore fangs and brandished claws fiercely. When Emperor Yanfeng's vital qi was depleted, the cloud and dragon qi poofed out, vanishing. Emperor Yanfeng mumbled while panting, "I have no more magic power, but you should have seen what I mean." Qin Mu nodded and executed his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique, fusing 9 Dragons Monarch technique with Overlord Body Vital Qi. Dragons suddenly appeared faintly in midair, and 9 dragons stretched their claws out to shatter the mountain rocks in a radius of dozens of yards around them. Emperor Yanfeng was stunned, and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was also beyond astonished. They saw 9 dragons circling in the sky. They then suddenly transformed into fire dragons, and as the blazing fire revolved in the sky, the fire dragon tornado appeared around them and lifted their bodies up. The fire dragons then transformed and controlled water, lifting them up while using it. Lightning then burst forth and crackled as it struck everywhere. Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked at each other and saw astonishment in the other's eyes. This 9 Dragons Monarch technique was just mastered by Qin Mu, and he already seemed like he had cultivated it for 10 or 20 years. He just picked the technique and was already much better than most of the princes in Imperial College's Royalties Park. Qin Mu dispersed 9 Heavens Divine Dragon Shroud, and Emperor Yanfeng taught him everything he had learned and comprehended. He sighed at the end. If your surname was Ling, how wonderful would that be? There were only 2-3 days left to the capital, and it was also 3 days till the Crown Prince's ascension on the 6th of the 3rd month. At that moment, a huge bird flapped its wings and landed on the ground with a tumble, transforming into a woman in green who bowed in front of the group. "Sacred teacher, everything is prepared." Qin Mu nodded and said, "You can go ahead first. As you command." The woman turned back and ran 2 steps before shaking her body to grow 2 wings on her back and soaring into the sky. "Since Great Thunderclap Monastery and Tao sect can kill an emperor, my heavenly devil cult can do so as well. Otherwise, how can we be the #1 sacred ground of the devil path?" Qin Mu said in a soft voice. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor frowned. "What's your plan?" "Enter the capital. Kill the emperor." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 266. Killing the Emperor. As they got closer and closer to the capital city, the scouts on the way also gradually increased in number. Even though there was a natural disaster outside, the places closer to the capital were still celebrating peace with songs and dance. Numerous trees were tied with red silk, and there were many envoys from numerous countries hurrying to the capital. The ascension of a new emperor was naturally no small matter. It was especially so when the new emperor had shown himself to be different from the previous ruler before he even ascended the throne. He was kind to foreign countries and was willing to form alliances with them. During the previous dynasty, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor liked to mobilize his army to swallow surrounding countries. He would press the other big countries against the ground to beat them and seize their territories. Either that or he would force the other side to submit to him and offer tribute. He was truly rampant. Before Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had mobilized his army to enter Great Ruins, that was when Eternal Peace Empire had been at its strongest. It could battle against 5 big countries at the same time, but after Imperial Preceptor got injured by assassins, the momentum of Eternal Peace Empire expansion started to slow down. The new emperor, however, was cultured and refined, very polite, and treated all sects of Eternal Peace kindly. He was also courteous to the envoys of the foreign countries. Not only did he return the lands that the fiendish Imperial Preceptor had conquered back to their respective owners, but even promised to pay reparations and was willing to repair the relations with those countries. The rule of foreign countries having to submit to Eternal Peace was also abolished by the new emperor, so they were all very happy and praised him endlessly. They said that the new Emperor Ling Yuxia was a wise ruler that was rare to see in the past 1,500 years. Other than that, the new emperor that had yet to ascend the throne invited members of various sects to attend the ascension ceremony. There were rumors saying that the new emperor planned to write down a decree of his crimes and would take on the wrath of heaven for the past years of reform. He would seek forgiveness from heaven and pray it would punish him and let off the people of Eternal Peace Empire. This move is the most ruthless. Qin Mu was exclaiming endlessly in admiration. He told Imperial Preceptor and the Emperor, "You guys tried to painstakingly reform for 200 years in order to change the profane notions, to push paths, skills, and divine arts to develop. You guys brought upon yourselves countless black names and spent endless blood and sweat. In your days, many people bled for the cause and finally formed Eternal Peace Empire to what it is today. Yet the new emperor pleading guilty will just wipe away all those 200 years of your hard work, those 200 years of soldiers sacrificing their lives again and again. This move is ruthless, truly ruthless." Emperor Yanfeng gave a dull grunt and a tearing pain seared his chest. He wanted to cry, but there were no tears as he said astringently, "Yuxia, my good son, consider this a knife stabbed in my heart." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor remained expressionless when he said, "After entering the capital, I can contact our old troops. Most of the ministers of the Imperial Court will also support your majesty. With the Dragon Guard's forbidden army hidden in the 9 dragon veins, we can attack the capital city anytime. The only problem is that Great Thunderclap Monastery and Tao sect had left so many monks and Taoists in the houses of kings, dukes, and ministers to supervise them under the cover of begging. Cult Master Qin, I will have to use the power of Heavenly Devil Cult to send us into the city to meet them." Qin Mu shook his head and said, "There's no need for so much trouble." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was slightly stunned. The forces of Great Thunderclap Monastery and Tao sect are too spread apart. They want to control the entire situation, but this leaves flaws everywhere. Qin Mu stopped. They were currently in Marquee Town, just a few hundred miles away from the capital and in front of a fried pancake stall. Qin Mu went to buy breakfast while he said, "It's like this fried pancake. Once it's too spread out, it will collapse at the first blow. The bigger their pancake is, the thinner it will get. When the crown prince ascends to the throne, there won't be enough power to guard him. The monks and Taoists that were left in the houses of kings, dukes, and ministers will then be controlled by those kings, dukes, and minister instead. Those people won't be able to go to the imperial city to provide support." The fried pancake was done, and the stall owner used oil paper to roll it up. Qin Mu took it from him and gave it to Imperial Preceptor's wife first. She took a bite and looked around with bright eyes. She asked in a low voice, "Aren't you afraid that walls have ears? There were quite a lot of scouts of the Crown Prince on the way here." "I'm not." Qin Mu smiled lightly. Suddenly, the passers-by, merchants, vegetable sellers and buyers, butchers, and hawkers in the market all quietened down and turned their heads over in unison. Their gazes all landed on the group. "Cult Master," those people said in unison. Qin Mu waved his hand and smiled. "Continue doing what you were doing. Don't disturb us." Imperial Preceptor's wife jumped in shock and Emperor Yanfeng sighed. Strict enforcement of rules and prohibitions leads to the rise of a king. "Cult Master Qin, you have scared me. Your heavenly saint cult has scared me." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said, "Strict enforcement of rules and prohibitions to move as one. This is the scene of the rise of a king, an emperor. Your Majesty should really worry. However, ever since Heavenly Saint Cult was founded 20,000 years ago, there had never been a cult master who referred to themselves as an emperor. Your Majesty can be at ease." Emperor Yanfeng said angrily, "You are all part of Heavenly Saint Cult. Even you husband and wife are also part of Heavenly Saint Cult. A heavenly king and an incense master. Only I'm the outsider here. Don't try to mislead me." Qin Mu immediately asked, "Does your Majesty want to join our cult? How do we enter the capital?" When they came close to the city, Emperor Yanfeng looked at the city gates and saw that they were heavily guarded. There were thorough inspections, so it was going to be as difficult as to climb up to the sky for them to get in. Today was the ascension of the Crown Prince, the day he would become the new emperor. Today, the new emperor would seek punishment from heaven at the Temple of Heaven. All the envoys, cult masters, sect masters, heads of influential families, as well as civil and military officials would have to go forward to attend the ceremony, so there was a tight security. Qin Mu shook his head and said, "No problem. Let's just go in directly." Emperor Yanfeng was slightly stunned. Qin Mu brought them to the city gates, and the soldiers there treated them like air and let them walk into the city. "They are also part of Heavenly Saint cult?" Imperial Preceptor's wife was slightly stunned and said to Qin Mu in a low voice, "The emperor is around, so don't be too flamboyant. Otherwise, you will cause His Majesty to be suspicious and jealous. The emperor wants to create a country that's above the sects and not a sect that's above the countries. Be cautious, cult master." Qin Mu looked at Emperor Yanfeng, and he was indeed looking worried. This was very normal. If all the imperial guards guarding the city gates of the capital were people of Heavenly Devil cult, how could he be at ease? "Eternal peace," Imperial Preceptor said. "Now that we have entered the city, what should we do?" Qin Mu took out 2 medicinal pills and handed them to Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor respectively. He said, "We'll go to Imperial City and the Temple of Heaven to see the ascension of the Crown Prince." In the Imperial City's throne room, a greeting could be heard. "Long live your Majesty." Eternal Peace Crown Prince Ling Yuxia sat on the dragon throne while donning the dragon robe. On one side of him stood a monk, while on his other side there was a Taoist. Below him were the civil and military officials that were paying their respects to the new emperor, which created a powerful and dynamic scene. There was an extremely huge number of civil and military officials, so the entire imperial hall was filled with officials kneeling down. There were also others who were kneeling outside the hall, and some even at the steps. In the hall, envoys from dozens of countries carried military banners from their countries to attend the ceremony. Near them, there were sect masters and cult masters from dozens of sects. The ceremonial rites for the ascension of a new emperor were rather complicated, so when the ceremony ended, it was already close to the afternoon. The sun of spring wasn't warm as Ling Yuxia walked in the front and led the civil and military officials out of the hall. The ceremonial weapon carriers followed him closely, and most of the people in the ceremonial weaponry were monks and Taoists who chanted Buddhist and Taoist scriptures with resonating voices. Behind them was the crown prince's concubine leading a crowd of palace maids with the envoys following behind them. All the heads of the influential families and sects also followed them to Temple of Heaven, the scale of the crowd becoming greater and greater. All the heads of the influential families and sects also followed them to Temple of Heaven, the scale of the crowd becoming greater and greater. Behind Ling Yuxia were his Grand Protector, Grand Preceptor, and the rest of the first-ranking high officials. They were the retainers of the imperial family, the arms of the crown prince, and had extremely high positions. Now that the emperor had died, Ling Yuxia naturally became the one to assume the throne. Since he knew that his foundation in the imperial court was still not stable, he had invited numerous monks and Taoists from Great Thunderclap Monastery and Tao sect, making them officials while demoting those that weren't willing to heed his words. Almost half of the civil and military officials of the imperial court were monks and Taoists, so the sight was rather peculiar as they chanted scriptures while heading to Temple of Heaven. As for Duke Wei, King of Mount Tai, Pillars of State, General of Heavenly Strategies, and the rest, Ling Yuxia had permitted them to retire because of their old age. They would be staying in the capital city for the moment and return to their hometowns after the ceremony. In the imperial court, almost half of the officials had to return home due to old age, even though some of them were still very young. It was quite a strange incident. Ling Yuxia didn't feel certain about these officials that were told to retire, so he didn't dare to let them out of the capital in fear of them rebelling. Because of that, they were all held captive in their respective manors, with monks and Taoists guarding them. Meanwhile, King of Mount Tai, General of Heavenly Strategies, and the rest were locked up in the prison. They reached Temple of Heaven and the officials flooded out. The monks and Taoists stood on the left and right sides of the steps respectively, while Ling Yuxia dragged his dragon robe and climbed up the steps by himself, acting reverent and respectful. Meanwhile, his concubine and those alongside her knelt down at the bottom of the stairs. The stairs were very long, with 999 stone steps. When Ling Yuxia reached the top of the Temple of Heaven and wanted to kneel down respectfully, a solemn voice suddenly rang out. Buddha Rulai of Great Thunderclap Monastery has passed down his decree. May your majesty receive the decree. A monk walked out with a solemn expression, and the Buddha rays behind him formed a wheel. In his hand was Rulai's decree. Ling Yuxia immediately knelt down to receive the decree and said respectfully, "This guilty subject will receive the decree of revered one of the world." Below, the ministers of the old dynasty frowned and lowered their heads without a word. The other officials that were monks chanted loudly in unison with their Buddha voices, and Buddha aura soared with 10,000 fathoms, resulting in a magnificent sight. There was a deluge of heavenly flowers in mid-air, and the apparitions of gods and Buddha appeared. With the brilliant and varied visions, it seemed like gods and Buddhas were blessing this ceremony. The monk read out Rulai's decree and said mainly that Emperor Yanfeng was a tyrant, because of which the people had to suffer heaven's wrath. Rulai encouraged the new emperor to be cautious and conscientious, to scrupulously abide by his duty, so the gods and Buddhas would bless him with prosperity and longevity, and so on. The crown prince received the decree. A Taoist came out then, and in his hands was a decree from Tao Master. Tao Master of Tao sect has passed down his decree. May your majesty receive the decree. Ling Yuxia knelt down once again. This guilty subject will receive the decree of Tao Master. The Taoists among the civil and military officials were not to be outdone. They played around with their vital qi and created auspicious visions of dragons and phoenixes dancing in the sky. Tao Master's decree also contained nothing more than encouragement for the new emperor to treat his citizens sincerely, to look after the office, and not to mess around with things like reforms and so on. The crown prince received the decree and rose. After tidying his robe, he was about to kneel down and seek forgiveness from heaven, but at that moment, a loud and clear voice came from afar. The cult master sacred teacher of heavenly devil cult passes down his decree personally. May your majesty receive the decree. When this sentence was heard by everyone, a commotion broke out under the temple of heaven, as the people all looked towards the source of the voice. With a couple of steps, Ling Yuxia came to the stairs of the Temple of Heaven and looked down. From his position high above, he saw a youth bringing along 2 monks and a Taoist nun towards the Temple of Heaven. The footsteps of the 2 monks seemed to be weak and unstable, while the Taoist nun seemed to be pregnant and so inconvenienced by her body. Qin Mu smiled and walked towards Temple of Heaven while saying leisurely, "Great Thunderclap Monastery is a sacred ground. Tao sect is a sacred ground. My heavenly devil cult is also a sacred ground. Ling Yuxia, Rulai and Tao Master didn't come yet, you still knelt down for their decree. Now that I have come personally, aren't you going to kneel to welcome me? Heavenly devil cult master." Suddenly, a sect master from an influential family sprung forward, wishing to land a killing blow on Qin Mu. At this moment, a huge flag appeared out of thin air beside Qin Mu and rolled up to block an attack from that sect master. When that huge flag was unfolded, a formidable man carrying a sword case showed up. A sword light then flew out and severed the head of the rash sect master. The man that was carrying the sword case swept up his huge flag and disappeared along with the head of his victim. Among the people attending the ceremony, a headless corpse swayed and collapsed to the ground. Qin Mu acted as if nothing had happened and continued to walk forward. When there were guards who wanted to make a move, huge flags appeared at the very instant they moved, and hall masters, elders, supervisors, and heavenly kings of heavenly devil cult appeared. As the huge flags fluttered in the air, they materialized and vanished all around the place. When they were finally gone, dozens of headless corpses were on the ground. Qin Mu brought Imperial Preceptor and the Emperor forward. Around them, flags kept materializing and vanishing from time to time. Those who tried to attack him were all assassinated in a violent manner. A trail of corpses was left behind on the path Qin Mu took, and all the bodies were missing heads. Qin Mu walked to the front of the Temple of Heaven and was about to walk up when the Crown Prince's concubine that was kneeling below suddenly made a move. The moment she did that, she became a corpse on the ground. The hair of the envoys, sect masters, cult masters, and heads of the influential families stood up on ends, and they dared not make another move. Heavenly Devil Cult was the #1 sacred cult of the Devil Path. The crowd had long heard of their reputation, but only now saw it for themselves. "Wife, don't look," Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor told his wife. Qin Mu began walking up the steps of the Temple of Heaven, and an eminent monk suddenly shouted out, "Heavenly Devil Cult Master, we have been waiting quite some time for you. Fellow Tao friends, encircle and annihilate Heavenly Devil Cult Master to subdue the devil." The monks ripped off their official robes while Taoists took out their sword pellets. In an instant, murderous aura rushed toward the sky in the Temple of Heaven. Qin Mu continued to walk forward. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Over 300 huge flags appeared, and 360 Hall Master materialized together. The 12 cult protector elders, 2 great cult heavenly kings, and the 8 great supervisors also showed up. Sounds of slaughter rang out in the Temple of Heaven. The 8 great supervisors didn't make their moves, but instead circled around Qin Mu. Murderous spirit filled the heaven over the Temple of Heaven as cult master-level existences, great experts of life and death realm, and celestial being realm waged, causing heaven to fall and earth to crack. The loud booms nearly crumbled all the palaces that surrounded the Temple of Heaven. Imperial City was in a state of chaos, and the guards hurried over. The capital city was also alarmed, and influential families that were lying low exploded with world-shaking powers. The monks and Taoists that wanted to provide support to Imperial City were all trapped and killed on the spot by those influential families. In the prison where General of Heavenly Strategies Qin Jian, High Official Su Yunji, and others were sitting, the gates suddenly opened. A prison head smiled and said, "His Majesty is back. He's at the Temple of Heaven." General of Heavenly Strategies and the rest were surprised and delighted. They immediately rushed out of prison and toward Temple of Heaven. "Where's Heavenly King Wei?" Heavenly King Yu shouted out loudly. "Heavenly King Wei is right here." A thunderous voice spread through the entire capital, and Duke Wei leaped from Duke's Manor and crashed onto the Temple of Heaven. He was completely suited up and had a fierce expression. "Who wants to die?" Qin Mu walked leisurely toward the top of the Temple of Heaven. The Grand Preceptor of the Crown Prince and the rest rushed forward to kill him but were stopped by Qin Jian and the rest who had rushed out of prison. No one could interrupt Qin Mu's footsteps.
On the top of the Temple of Heaven, Ling Yuxia revealed a look of panic and looked toward the monk and Taoist on his left and right. These 2 people immediately pounced forward, but before their feet could even touch the floor, they were slaughtered by the 8 great supervisors, their blood spattering the ground. "Civil and military officials, I'm the Emperor," Ling Yuxia shouted out sternly. "Do you plan on rebelling with these Devil Path practitioners and ignore my orders?" "Emperor?" Emperor Yanfeng snorted and consumed the medicinal pill that Qin Mu had given him. His hair immediately grew out, and he wiped away the knife scar on his face. In a solemn voice, he said, "Take a look at who I am." Ling Yuxia's complexion changed drastically. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor also consumed the medicinal pill, and his hair also grew back. Wiping away the green birthmark on his face, he turned around. The civil and military officials had planned to make a move when they heard the new emperor's order, but when they saw Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, they all knelt down and worshipped them. Ling Yuxia rushed towards Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor in a crazed state while shouting, "I'm the Son of Heaven." The 8 great supervisors moved and gave a blow each to Ling Yuxia. The man vomited blood, and his body suddenly transformed into a dragon, soaring into the sky to escape. The 8 great supervisors lifted their clothes up and vanished. The next instant, Ling Yuxia was detained by the 8 of them and knelt down at the center of the Temple of Heaven. Emperor Yanfeng looked at the civil and military officials and shouted, "Why aren't you guys quelling the rebellion? Why aren't you guys killing all these Taoists and monks that have rebelled? Are you waiting for me to make a move myself?" The civil and military officials immediately sprung into action and slaughtered the monks and Taoists of Great Thunderclap Monastery and Tao sect. Even the imperial guards that were rushing over also landed killing blows on them. When Qin Mu came to the top of the Temple of Heaven, Ling Yuxia was kneeling on the floor from the pressure, unable to break free. Qin Mu stooped down and leaned into his ear to say in a low voice, "Your Highness, I didn't do this to help the Emperor. This is all for Heavenly King Qian and Heavenly King Lu of my sacred cult." Ling Yuxia was stunned and raised his head to look up, his eyes filled with disbelief. "You?" Qin Mu pulled out Junior Protector Sword and beheaded him with a single strike. Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor came to the top of the Temple of Heaven the moment the sword sliced down and Ling Yuxia's head went flying high up into the sky. Emperor Yanfeng's heart trembled violently when he looked at the back of the youth before him. The sight of that youth shaking off the blood on the sword and returning it to its sheath struck fear into his heart.
Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 267. Just for Cultivation. Imperial Preceptor's wife had also come to the Temple of Heaven. As she watched Qin Mu return the sword to its sheath and Emperor Yanfeng focus on his back, worry crossed his young woman's brow. The bloody battle was soon pacified. Those monks and Taoists of Great Thunderclap Monastery and Tao sect that could escape had escaped while the rest had been killed. The majority of them had died here, and their blood dyed the Temple of Heaven red. Blood trickled down from the 999th step all the way to the first step, then flowed to the feet of all the envoys, cult masters, and sect masters. Temple of Heaven, this place in which tributes were offered to heaven, had been dyed the red of blood. It was impossible to say who was the first to suddenly kneel down and shout out, "Long live your majesty!" Whoosh! At the bottom of the Temple of Heaven, no matter if they were officials, envoys, sect masters, or cult masters, they all knelt down on one knee and shouted in unison, "Long live your majesty!" Emperor Yanfeng turned around while standing at the top of the stairs. He spread his arms and faced the worship of these subjects. After a moment, he raised his hands weakly and said, "Rise." Imperial Preceptor's wife looked at Emperor Yanfeng. Behind him, Qin Mu and the 8 great supervisors were also standing on top of the Temple of Heaven and didn't kneel down. "Husband, it might not be a good thing for Cult Master Qin to show off his ability," she whispered to Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. He took a glance at Qin Mu and shook his head. To him, Eternal Peace Empire is just a place to learn through experience, so killing the Crown Prince is also merely an experience. He doesn't have much to worry about, and the Emperor does need his support in many places. Imperial Preceptor's wife was astonished. "Experience." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor nodded. "Experience." The Crown Prince colluded with Tao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery to plan a rebellion, conspiring to murder the Emperor and seize the throne. The consequences of these actions were no small matter. Yet in the records of the scribes, there would only be an ordinary sentence which said, "On the 18th of the 2nd month, Crown Prince Yuxia conspired to rebel. 6th of the 3rd month, executed." It was this simple. The details regarding this were not for outsiders to know. That's why most of the stories would only appear in history as popular legends. However, most of them were distorted truths, so they couldn't be trusted. After the rebellion came a bloody purge. The officials of the Crown Princes had their properties seized and families executed. The Taoists and monks from Tao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery were detained in custody and sent to the execution grounds. Executions were carried out in the food market all the way from the 7th of the 3rd month to the 1st of the 4th month. Only then did the executions end. Some incidents also happened in the meantime. For example, the Crown Prince's head was not found. It had vanished without a trace, and no matter how everyone searched the surroundings of the Temple of Heaven, the head couldn't be found. In the end, Emperor Yanfeng never ordered anyone to dig into it. The Emperor instead passed down his decree to rid Crown Prince Ling Yuxia's name from the imperial family's genealogical record. The Crown Prince's birth mother, the previous empress who was already deceased, was also demoted to an imperial concubine. Emperor Yanfeng then replaced the officials and selected a few younger imperial scholars from Imperial College to promote. He also selected capable people from each and every army to replenish the empty official positions. A few days later, the Emperor summoned Second Prince Ling Yushu back from the borders to talk about his duties. After a few more days, the Emperor felt his body slightly ill and conferred Ling Yushu as the Crown Prince, to supervise the empire and manage all the politics. Emperor Yanfeng summoned Crown Prince Ling Yushi and asked him, Yushi, now that you're managing the politics, what's the first thing you have to do? He didn't view highly this second son of his. Ling Yushi wasn't considered outstanding among his children. Among all of them, he wasn't the one with the greatest resolution, and his aptitude wasn't the most outstanding either. For those two things, he had admired Ling Yushi very much. That child had had the resolution, courage, and aptitude. However, he was too bold and too resolute. Meanwhile, his other elder sons had died too early while waiting for him to step away. Ling Yushi pondered for a moment. He had just returned from the battlefield, and the few months of experience had given him a pressing heroic spirit and some decisiveness. Because he was not in the capital city when Ling Yushi had colluded with Great Thunderclap Monastery and Dao sect to rebel, he had escaped unscathed. Ling Yushi said solemnly, "Son will abolish big brothers." Emperor Yanfeng's expression sunk. "You're the eldest son now. I don't have a son like him." Ling Yushi paused for a while, then said, "Son will abolish the treaties he had signed with the foreign countries and take back the land we have given away. I'll then purge those sects that had tried to swallow the lands during the chaos. Seeing how Dao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery have suffered such a defeat and lost a great number of experts, I will take back more than half of the lands that belong to Dao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery." Emperor Yanfeng's expression softened, and he asked, "Then, I will help Father send disaster relief, but before that, I will first write down a decree of my crimes." Emperor Yanfeng suddenly burst in anger and shouted out, "Say it once more!" Ling Yushi bowed and said solemnly, "I will first write down a decree of my crimes and pray for heaven to not send any more disasters to appease the hearts of the citizens." Emperor Yanfeng's face was still grim when he said coldly, "Who taught you that?" Ling Yushi was slightly stunned. I asked, "Who taught you that?" Emperor Yanfeng rose, unable to restrain his anger. As he walked to and fro, he shouted loudly, "You are my son. I know you inside out, and you are unable to say such things." These words aren't what the second prince would be considering, but something that could only be understood by standing at the position of the emperor. Say, "Who taught you that?" Cold sweat broke out on Ling Yushu's forehead, and he suddenly gritted his teeth to say honestly, "When I returned to the capital, I went to visit Imperial Preceptor and coincidentally met Palace Grandee treating Imperial Preceptor's injuries. This son discussed with them about how Father would inquire me about politics to test me. Thus I asked them for ideas." Emperor Yanfeng's anger subsided, and he asked calmly, "Who was the one who suggests writing a decree of your crimes?" Both Imperial Preceptor and Palace Grandee said it. They said this calamity was the act of heavenly gods, so why don't we go according to their will and plan slowly? If we go against them directly, we will only be defeated. For me to write a decree on my crimes is better than Father writing it himself. If Father writes a decree, it will mean you that deny the reform, but this son is the crown prince, so I can feign civility. Emperor Yanfeng's expression softened, and he sat down. "I know your abilities and wisdom, your courage and insight, so I know you wouldn't have thought about such things yet. That's why there was definitely someone who had taught you that, and that's why I acted angry. Even if I'm asking you about politics, there's no need to follow what they taught you, you have to say your own understanding as well." Ling Yushi acknowledged. Emperor Yanfeng sighed. "I'm not worried about Imperial Preceptor, but Palace Grandee. I'm afraid that when a day comes when Imperial Preceptor and I are no longer around, you won't be able to outdo him. Now that my cultivation is lost and my divine treasures are destroyed, it's hard for me to train my cultivation back, so I made you supervise this empire, manage all the politics. You should be cautious and conscientious. If I can't regain my cultivation back, my lifespan will at most be some 50 years. When that time comes, you will be the emperor. Broaden your horizons and also broaden your breadth of mind. Think more by yourself." And at this moment, on Saint Arrival Mountain of Heavenly Devil Cult, Qin Mu led all the hall masters, elders, and the rest of the cult to the graves of Heavenly King Qian and Heavenly King Lu. The latter had only left behind a pile of ashes while the former's body hadn't been found, so were buried in the grave were the clothes they had worn when they were alive. Qin Mu went forward and placed Crown Prince Ling Yushi's head in front of the graves. and everyone offered incense and paid their respects. Two heavenly kings, if your spirits can hear me, you can rest in peace now. Heavenly King Yu prayed. Now that heaven is sending disasters on us, troubled times and calamities are inevitable. Two heavenly kings, senior brothers, do protect our sacred cult. After everyone paid their respects, they dispersed. Heavenly King Yu came to Qin Mu's side and hesitated before asking, Cult Master is still returning to eternal peace? Qin Mu nodded. Heavenly King Yu was puzzled. This time our sacred cult took Imperial Preceptor and killed the fake emperor as well as numerous strong practitioners of Tao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery. So I'm afraid that the emperor will be guarding against us. Isn't Cult Master worried about going back? Qin Mu looked at the gravestones of the two heavenly kings and said with a peaceful expression, Tao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery are still around. So the most important thing for the emperor is to get rid of these two big sacred grounds. Without getting rid of them first, he won't lay a hand on our heavenly saint cult. Only once he cleans up those will we need to be careful. As for now, there's no need to worry. Heavenly King Yu thought over it and realized that it was indeed logical. Qin Mu walked towards the sacred tree and gently touched its grain. Lifting his head up to look at the crown, he said, The path of the saint is none other than the everyday use of common people. Heavenly King Yu, do you really think we can change the great Tao of heaven and earth? Heavenly King Yu walked forward and said, I'm naturally dumb and the question Cult Master asked is too profound. I'm afraid I'm unable to answer it. However, I know that there were no roads in the past, but as more people started walking, a road was formed. People then disliked having to walk in the mud when it started raining, and so they covered the roads with slabs of stone. The roads then became much easier to walk on. After that, people found walking slow, so they created wheels and vehicles. That's how horse carriages started to sprint through the roads. I think there was never a road for horse carriages, but after humans created it, there became a new addition to the great Tao of heaven and earth. Qin Mu was stunned. Heavenly King Yu continued. After that, people found horse carriages slow and created ships that could fly in the sky. They didn't have copper and gold, so they extracted them out from ores. Some letters were too far to be delivered, so they created flying mail. I think as more and more things get created by the humans, the great Tao of heaven and earth gradually increases as well. Qin Mu was slightly in a daze. He saw that the sacred tree only had one trunk, but it branched out and those branches had even more branches. While faced with that sight, he couldn't help revealing a smile. In the past, when winter came to the north, it was hard for them to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, but now that there are flying ships, the fruits and vegetables from the south can be transported to the north in a matter of days. In the past, there were inhospitable natural environments where demons roamed. Now we can cast spells to change the terrain, transforming barren hills and wild rivers into verdant hills and limpid water. In the past, the lands were infertile and not many crops could be produced. But now we can transform infertile land into fertile land, Heavenly King Yu said. In the past, wind, rain, thunder, and lightning were meteorological phenomenon, but now people can control these things. Cult Master, have we changed the great Tao of heaven and earth? Qin Mu nodded and smiled. I think we have. Cult Master, I'm naturally dumb. You aren't dumb at all. Qin Mu broke him off and smiled. Heavenly King Yu, you're a capable person. There's no need to always be so humble. What did you want to ask just now? Cult Master said earlier that the Emperor might make a move on our Heavenly Saint cult after he eradicates the two big sacred grounds. I wonder if Cult Master has any countermeasures? Maybe Cult Master can also be an Emperor. Qin Mu shook his head and said, I won't. As long as what the Emperor is doing is similar to our goals, it doesn't matter if I'm the Emperor or not. Furthermore, Imperial Preceptor is now the fourth Heavenly King of our sacred cult. If he doesn't meet with an accident, how would the Emperor make a move on us? In addition, I'm afraid it won't be that easy to eradicate Tao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery. Don't think too much. I've come to eternal peace just for experience and cultivation. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 268. Beauty and the Painting. Qin Mu left Saint Arrival Mountain and returned to Imperial College. Gu Linwan immediately ran over and held a banquet to welcome him back. Qin Mu stared with eyes wide open, torn between laughter and tears. He smiled and asked, Lord Gu, is there a need for this? Gu Linwan smiled and said, as fellow practitioners of the devil path, we naturally have to support one another. Cult Master Qin, is Junior Protector Sword still to your liking? It is. I'm not returning it, Qin Mu explained. The rules of our great ruins. I know. Gu Linwan laughed loudly. I stayed in Great Ruins for 200 years and I know its rules. Things that got scammed with one's abilities are never returned. You see? Aren't you regarding me as an outsider again? Ha 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 ha. I've stayed in Great Ruins for 200 years, so Great Ruins can be considered to be partly my homeland. We're half fellow countrymen. Now that Cult Master Qin has returned from our homeland, how can I not treat you to a meal to relieve the feeling of homesickness? Qin Mu was flabbergasted and sighed. Lord Gu's realm is too high. This little brother admires you. I dare not, I dare not. Cult Master Qin is the talented youth, born a hero. After they flattered each other, Gu Linwan sighed ruefully. When I first saw you in Great Ruins, I instantly knew you weren't any mediocre talent, but bound to achieve meteoric success in your career. Yet never would have I expected this day to come so fast. Cult Master Qin, sigh, ain't I regarding you as an outsider by calling you Cult Master Qin? Cult Master, due to unforeseen circumstances, there are quite a lot of empty positions among the first and second ranking officials in the Imperial Court. Could Cult Master help to pull some strings? Qin Mu didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, Lord Gu, I'm just a fifth-ranking little official. If Cult Master doesn't regard me as an outsider, you can call me Linwan. Qin Mu composed himself and said, I'm merely a fifth-ranking palace grandee without any real power in hand. Where do I have the rights to ask questions regarding the promotions of first and second-ranking officials? Truth be told, the sword that killed the Crown Prince was this Junior Protector Sword that I scammed from Lord Gu. The Emperor is actually bearing a grudge in his heart and has some worries towards my Heavenly Saint cult. If I tried to put in a word to raise the rank of Lord Gu, I would actually be harming you. Gu Linwan smiled. That's indeed the case. Cult Master is wise. Let me propose a toast to you. He was an understanding man, and the motive behind his invitation to the banquet wasn't to make Qin Mu put in a word to the Emperor for him to rise in ranks. It was to make friends with Qin Mu and resolve their earlier grudges. No matter if Qin Mu was or wasn't the Emperor's favorite person now, he had to make friends with him. The Devil Cult Master of Heavenly Devil Cult was in existence on the same level as Rulai and Dao Master. Building a good relationship with Qin Mu was equivalent to building a good relationship with Rulai or Dao Master, and if that could be done with just a banquet, it was naturally a profitable bargain. After the banquet, Gu Linwan personally sent Qin Mu back to Scholar's residence. On their way back, Qin Mu was bewildered when he noticed some foreigners at Imperial College. After the rebellion, the new Crown Prince abolished the treaty the renegade had signed and took back the lands. Some of the foreign countries were terrified, so they sent over peaceful envoys to learn the culture of eternal peace. Gu Linwan could see his suspicions and said, the Crown Prince permitted it. He permitted foreigners to seek knowledge in eternal peace while some descendants of aristocrats would be learning in Imperial College. Qin Mu nodded, then suddenly saw a familiar face and was slightly stunned. He smiled towards a youth and called out, Pangong Tso. That youth who was from the barbarian race in the prairie turned back to look at Qin Mu, with puzzlement in his eyes. There were numerous retainers from his foreign country following behind him, and two of them were great shamans of Roland's Golden Palace. Pangong Tso asked the person beside him in a low voice, and a great shaman immediately said something to him in a low voice. Pangong Tso suddenly understood and returned a greeting to Qin Mu indifferently. So it's Heavenly Devil Cult Master. What's the matter, Cult Master? Qin Mu was stunned again and just shook his head. Nothing. Pangong Tso and the rest walked away. Qin Mu frowned slightly, and Gu Linwan caught it. He asked, Cult Master, you recognize this Pangong Tso? He's the youngest son of Barbarian D Empire's Khan. I once saw him practicing his punches at the border, and his fist skills have a unique bearing, which should stem from a unique constitution. Qin Mu looked at the back of Pan Gong Tso and pondered over it. He once challenged Chancellor Ba Shan and said he will definitely defeat Chancellor Ba Shan in the future, giving me a deep impression of him. Why does it seem like he just met me for the first time? Gu Linwan smiled and said, with the nature of a youth, he must have forgotten. Qin Mu returned to Scholar's residence, where the dragon Qilin lay outside the house. When he came into the room, he felt that it was lonely and somehow wrong. If only Linger was here, he sighed to himself. If Hu Linger was here, she would definitely tidy up the room so this place wouldn't so messy. The entire room would also be arranged comfortably. Suddenly, the low and muffled voice of the dragon Qilin came from outside. Young lady, who are you looking for? Is your cult master Qin around? A pleasant voice asked. He is. I'm going in. Okay. Qin Mu immediately walked out of the room and saw Ling Yuxiu pushing the door. This young lady was charming as she smiled with her red lips and white teeth. She wore a gown with a red overlap and collar. When she walked into the courtyard, an air brimming with youthfulness bombarded Qin Mu and made his heart race slightly. The one who herds cows. The girl's eyes were shining brightly as she walked over with a smile. The big dog at your door is quite easy to talk to. I'm going to put him on the table for the next New Year's dinner. He can't even guard a door properly. Qin Mu said ruthlessly. The dragon Qilin's voice came from outside. Cult master. I heard everything. I wanted you to hear it. You only know how to eat besides sleeping. Qin Mu examined this princess in detail and saw that she was becoming more and more beautiful, even if her face still had the childish nature of an infant. However, she was still taller than Qin Mu and was a big young lady. Her spring gown couldn't hide her alluring figure, the two melons that were about to burst out, making it hard for him to move his gaze away from her body. Qin Mu had also started to grow taller recently, and he was doing it as frantically as the weeds in a desolate land once spring came. The last time they've met, this princess was still a wild lass who wore male clothing, was very free and at ease. Ling Yuxiu came to the front of the yellow pear tree in the courtyard and only saw small buds. However, the blossoms needed to open up first and the stamens to pop their heads from the tender petals. Ling Yuxiu stretched her slender jade hands to fiddle with the flowers and smiled. You're pretty interesting to plant a pear tree on a jade mountain. When the pear blossoms, I must definitely come to admire. Don't move. Qin Mu's eyes lighted up, and he said, stay in this posture. Give me a second. He quickly took out his brush, ink, paper, and inkstone to paint. Ling Yuxiu was a little impatient and said, are you done yet? My arm is already aching. Right away. Qin Mu was about to finish the painting, but he stopped at the last stroke, taking out his seal to stamp on the painting before placing down the last stroke with a smile. It's done. Ling Yuxiu came over and looked at his painting. She saw that she looked slightly shy in the painting, and it was evident that Qin Mu had managed to capture the bashfulness that had poured out from her heart. Such likeness! Ling Yuxiu exclaimed in admiration. Why did you have to stamp your seal first before drawing the last stroke? My painting skill is too good. If I finish the last stroke first, you will walk down from the painting and run away. This stamp is also called a seal. Take a look at the picture on the seal. It isn't my surname but a kind of sealing rune instead, Qin Mu explained. Ling Yuxiu went up to take a look at the seal and the two of them huddled together. Qin Mu's gaze shifted toward the face of the girl and saw the soft redness on her fair cheek as well as her bright and clear eyes. While she looked at the seal seriously, her fair neck was very moving and her serious attitude made his heart race. It's really sealing runes. Ling Yuxiu was astonished and said curiously, if this seal is wiped away, can I really walk out of the painting? Qin Mu nodded and said, what I use is bestowing soul skill and bestowing the divine soul with a dot using mutual sensitivity. However, I only succeeded once and I don't know if it would have worked this time. Still, it's best to seal the painting in case you run away. Ling Yuxiu looked at him shyly and immediately rolled up the painting. This painting in mine, don't steal it from me. That's right, I've almost forgotten about the task at hand. Father has summoned you into the palace. He said it's for diagnosing his injuries. I met the eunuch sending the decree and took his job. Qin Mu tidied up his clothes and said, "Are you coming along with me?" "All right. We haven't met for quite a while and I have things I want to tell you." The young man and young woman walked out of the room, and the dragon Qilin raised his head. "Cult Master, I'll guard the door and definitely not let anyone in." "Got it," Qin Mu said. "Perform well and I won't put you on the table for New Year. And also, train more, remember all the muscles on the green bull's body. How can you defeat him like this?" The two people walked out of Scholar's residence and saw many scholars greeting them with smiles on the way. However, most of them looked terrified, so it was evident that they had heard that Qin Mu was the devil cult master of Heavenly Devil Cult, a fellow of savage nature. He had chopped off Ling Yuxia's head in front of the emperor and was truly fiendish. Outside Scholar's residence, Chancellor Ba Shan walked over with long strides and behind him were two scholars. One of them was Wei Yong and the other was Yu Qinghong. These two people had great improvements in their cultivation, so it was obvious that they had received quite a lot of benefits from cultivating with Chancellor Ba Shan. Behind them came a big green bull that was incomparably robust. He walked on the road with 2 legs and lumps of muscle covered his entire body. Fire spewed out from his nostrils, and he looked extremely fiendish with a peony in his mouth. Chancellor Ba Shan stopped and smiled. "Cult Master Qin, are you two eloping?" "We're not," Ling Yuxiu said angrily. "Don't speak nonsense, Teacher Ba Shan. Father has summoned him to the palace." Chancellor Ba Shan laughed loudly and said to Qin Mu, "I met that Pangong Tso brat of Barbarian D Empire just now, and he has become very strange. Even though he recognizes me, he's no longer that Pangong Tso." Qin Mu nodded and said, "I also have this feeling. Pangong Tso didn't recognize me, and he seemed like a different person. His abilities are very strong. No weaker than yours," Chancellor Ba Shan said. Qin Mu's blinked and asked in doubt, "No weaker than mine? I'm very strong." Chancellor Ba Shan gave him a look. "His 6 directions divine treasure is about to break through, and I can also feel a kind of terrifying power hiding in his body. You might not be able to beat him. Could this barbarian brat have had a miraculous encounter? Yet it doesn't seem like a miraculous encounter, but more like spirit possession. Go and meet the emperor first. I'll come and find you later." Qin Mu came to the palace with Ling Yuxiu to see that both the emperor and imperial preceptor were there. Beside them was also an ugly man whose face was covered in warts, and he was diagnosing their injuries. Qin Mu walked in, and Emperor Yanfeng raised his head to reveal a smile. "Palace Grandee is here." The man whose face was covered in warts looked at Qin Mu and his mouth broke into a grin. He was like a huge toad that had transformed into a spirit, and his smile looked like a crying face. "Junior brother, is teacher, that old man, still doing well?" Qin Mu stopped in his footsteps and stretched his hand out to block Ling Yuxiu's way. "Little Poison King? Tales of Hurting Gods." Chapter 269, Battle of the Divine Physicians. "Junior brother seems to be pretty wary of me." Little Poison King smiled. "Even though we are senior and junior brothers, we have never met before. We should have been closer." Qin Mu lowered his arms. He had heard rumors about this Little Poison King and heard Empress Dowager mention him before. The reason why Grandpa Apothecary had sliced off his face and went to hide in great ruins was also because of this person. Little Poison King was Apothecary's proudest disciple, yet he had betrayed Apothecary and leaked the news that Jade-Face Playboy was none other than Poison King. Jade-Face Playboy and Poison King had been 2 people in the martial world. One of them was a free and romantic man that was exceptionally handsome. He was tall, attractive, heroic, and treated everyone politely like the spring wind, leaving lovers everywhere. He didn't need to womanize, for women would come to him by themselves. Everyone adored and admired him, so even though men were usually envious of him, they couldn't bring themselves to hate him. Poison King, however, was ferocious-looking and his methods were ruthless, his infamy spreading far and wide. He had once killed countless experts and even eradicated a sect of the righteous path, poisoning everyone in it. Not one person was left alive in it. Even Tao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery had many monks and Taoists dead from his poison. Poison King's cultivation wasn't high, but his abilities were extremely formidable. No matter if it was poison or venomous insects, his attainments had reached the peak. Numerous ambushes to catch him had been set up by both the Righteous and Devil Path, and even a few cult master-level existences were mobilized, but none of them had managed to take him down. All of them instead died of poison. Poison King wore a green mask with tusks, so no one knew his true appearance. It wasn't until his disciple Little Poison King leaked the truth that the people learned that Poison King was the dissolute jade-faced playboy. Once his identity was revealed, things became complicated. Some people wanted to kill him, while some women fought among themselves for him, and even a powerful woman like Empress Dowager joined in the fight. This gave Apothecary no choice but to slice off his face and abandon all feelings. He then went to hide in great ruins, not daring to step out of them for the next half of his lifetime. However, Little Poison King's days weren't good as well. Empress Dowager and the rest of the women vented out their anger on his head and chased after his life everywhere. Little Poison King had also almost been forced into hiding in great ruins, but he was lucky since Imperial Preceptor took him in. In regards to Apothecary's encounters, Qin Mu had only heard rumors and didn't know what had happened exactly. However, he knew Little Poison King had inherited Apothecary's teaching, and his attainments with poison were already catching up to those of Apothecary. Emperor Yanfeng smiled and said, "Cult Master, I have invited you and Little Poison King because both of you are disciples of Jade-Face Poison King. One is proficient in using poison while the other is proficient in medical treatments. With both of you working together, you just might be able to cure Imperial Preceptor and me." Qin Mu revealed a smile. "At your Majesty's command. I would also like to see Senior Brothers trade." Little Poison King checked the Emperor's injuries and examined the effects of Qin Mu's treatments. The warts on his face became more and more terrifying as he smiled. "Your trade is not bad, solving 1,000 opportunities poison in one night." On the other hand, Qin Mu was examining Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. After returning to the capital city, it was Little Poison King who had been treating Imperial Preceptor's injuries. He said indifferently, "You ain't bad as well. The way you used 1,000 opportunities poison was marvelous." A wart near the arm of Little Poison King suddenly burst open with a pop, and some transparent little spiders came climbing out. These little spiders spewed out webs which hit the heart of Emperor Yanfeng's brows. They then climbed into the heart of Emperor Yanfeng's brows through the spider silks and tunneled into his spirit embryo divine treasure. "I didn't want to poison her to death. With my skills, it isn't troublesome to poison a cult master," Little Poison King said leisurely. "No matter which cult master of which cult, poisoning them is no trouble for me." Qin Mu didn't raise his eyebrows. Instead, 2 more heavens appeared in his eyes as he used Green Heaven's eyes to examine Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's injuries. "Even if you had poisoned her body to death, I could have still kept her soul and saved her after detoxing the poison. Furthermore, Cult Master ain't somebody you can poison at will. For a Cult Master, there's no need to even meet you to kill you. Especially for devil cults, they have 1,000 ways to have a person die in an unfathomable way, yet still as it should be by rights. When Senior Brother finds himself dead in a smelly sewer one day, he will understand." "Is that so?" Little Poison King had a sinister expression, and his smile was even uglier than a crying face. "That's right." Qin Mu smiled like a flower. The two of them looked each other in the eyes. Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's hearts were palpitating from fear. The moment the two people had met each other, they started fighting with words, and their murderous intent was flourishing more and more. Ling Yuxiu blinked, her gaze moving between the two people. She felt that the situation was going out of control, so she smiled and said, "Little Poison King, Cult Master Qin, the treatment is more important." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor gave a cough, and Emperor Yanfeng gave a cough as well before saying, "Yuxiu, fall back first." Ling Yuxiu understood and walked out of the hall. The warts on Little Poison King's face burst open, and insects that looked like fish flew out to tunnel into the other divine treasures of Emperor Yanfeng. After examining the injuries there, he said, "You are really not bad. getting rid of the hidden damages in His Majesty's divine treasures. The injuries on his corporeal body and soul are completely healed, but it's a pity your medical expertise is still lacking and can't treat the divine treasures. Qin Mu looked at the remnants of the god's divine art in Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's body and saw that Little Poison King had used poisonous substances which he transformed into technique-dissolving spirit silks to coil around those remnants. He was trying to wear them down since the poison silks had the effect of dissolving techniques, divine arts, and even vital qi. However, the effects were minimal when against the divine arts of gods. Your poison technique has reached perfection, the realm of having both material form and internal spirit. Theses' technique dissolving spirit silks were used marvelously, but they still can go up another level. Qin Mu smiled. The gazes of the two people met once again. Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's scalps turned numb. If these two people were to battle, they would probably use poison and medicine on their bodies. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said, "Both of you are divine physicians and come from the same teacher. Do you have any solutions?" Little Poison King immediately said, "I am already quite confident in treating His Majesty's injuries. Since His Majesty's divine treasures are destroyed, I can fetch the divine treasures of a living human to transfer them over." Emperor Yanfeng frowned. "How certain are you?" "This." Little Poison King hesitated and took a glance at Qin Mu. "I'm proficient in using poison, so I can't really say how certain I am." Qin Mu said, "Imperial Preceptor's injuries can't be solved with just technique-dissolving spirit silks, for the problem still lies in the remnants of the divine arts left behind by the god being too strong. What I think is we should do is find a few dozen strong practitioners of the cult master level to suppress those remnants, which would allow Imperial Preceptor to utilize his own cultivation to refine them." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor shook his head and said, "There are indeed a few dozen strong practitioners of cult master level within the borders of Eternal Peace Empire, but it'd be hard to gather everyone to help me. 2 divine physicians, since one of you use poison and one of you use medicine, you guys just might be able to complement each other." Qin Mu took a look at Little Poison King, and Little Poison King also looked at him. "My master Jade Face Poison King is matchless in his poison and medicine. He can use medicine to boost poison and poison to boost medicine," said Little Poison King. "How many times can you boost my poison?" Qin Mu replied coldly, "We'll have to see how intense Senior Brother's toxicity is. I can use medicine to greatly supplement His Majesty's vital qi and raise his life force, allowing His Majesty's life force and vital qi to cure the injuries in his divine treasures. How intense is your poison? Can it raise the vital qi and life force of my medicine by 30 to 50 times? As intense as you want." Little Poison King sneered. "I'm afraid your tonic can't handle my toxins. To refine the remnants of the divine arts in Imperial Preceptor, I need the toxicity of technique-dissolving spirit silks to be raised by 30 to 50 times. With such high toxicity, even gods can be poisoned to death and dissolve into skeletons. Do you have the ability?" Qin Mu gritted his teeth. "I can try." Venomous insects climbed out from Emperor Yanfeng's body and tunneled back into the warts on Little Poison King's hands and face. "If you can't refine such a tonic, I'll poison you to death." He chuckled. Qin Mu's expression was indifferent. "If you use the wrong toxin, I will ensure your life so I can bring you back to great ruins." Little Poison King's expression changed drastically, and he let out a cold snort. With a raise of his brush, he wrote down a list of toxic herbs. Qin Mu also wrote down a prescription. "Your Majesty, send people to grab the herbs." Both of them threw down their brushes and sat down silently. Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked at each other in dismay. These two had a big temper and didn't look like they planned to treat their injuries. On the contrary, they looked like they were going to take their lives. Emperor Yanfeng coughed and summoned the Imperial physicians waiting outside the hall. "Grab the herbs quickly." The Imperial physicians immediately took the prescriptions and hurried on their way. "Your tonic is quite intense." Little Poison King smiled in a sinister manner. Qin Mu ignored him, and after some time, the Imperial physicians finally brought over all the toxic and healing herbs that they required. Qin Mu immediately made his move and extracted the medicinal energy. He executed his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique and transformed into the cow-headed human-bodied Mars Sovereign and the tiger-headed human-bodied Venus Sovereign from time to time. He also transformed into Mercury Sovereign, Jupiter Sovereign, and Saturn Sovereign, transforming his form and vital chi to extract out all kinds of medicinal energies. Meanwhile, Little Poison King used the toxic herbs to raise his insects. He let them eat the poisonous substances before refining the little creatures into poisonous pills, which he used to feed other venomous insects. Repeating this several times, he finally raised a huge pitch-black spider with red eyes. Poisonous gas actually congealed around it and didn't show any sign of dispersing. On Qin Mu's side, he took a few seeds and started planting flowers in the hall. He planted the seeds in the spirit pills that he had refined and used Earth Aeon creation technique, so the flowers would absorb the medicinal energies of the spirit pills. Not long later, the flowers bloomed and bore fruits. He then plucked the spirit fruits that he required and refined them again. After repeating this for a few more times, the herbs that had piled up into a mountain were refined into 7 spirit pills and 1 red pellet. Qin Mu picked them all up and looked at Little Poison King. Little Poison King had by then refined the huge spider to death and created a string of spirit silks that practically couldn't be seen and a small bottle of poisonous liquid. The two of them looked each other in the eyes, and Qin Mu threw the red pellet to Little Poison King while Little Poison King threw the poisonous liquid to him. Qin Mu squeezed out a smile and said gently, "Your Majesty, it's time for your medicine." Emperor Yanfeng's heart began to pound and his body twitched as he looked at the 7 spirit pills and the bottle of poisonous liquid Qin Mu was holding. "Minister, the toxicity. It is very great." Qin Mu took a glance at Little Poison King. "If your Majesty dies, I will take revenge for your Majesty." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked at the red pellet and spider silks in front of him with hesitation. Little Poison King said, "Don't worry, Imperial Preceptor, you're fine, you're fine." Qin Mu's figure transformed into a shadow and tunneled into Emperor Yanfeng's divine treasures. He placed the 7 spirit pills into the 7 realms. He poured a few droplets of poisonous liquid onto each of the spirit pills before withdrawing. Little Poison King smacked the spirit silks into Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's body and gave a pull with his hand to pull out a thread of spider silk from his patient's mouth. He wrapped the spider silk around the red pellet before stuffing it into Imperial Preceptor's mouth. A world-shaking bang came from Emperor Yanfeng's body, and all the hair on his body suddenly began to grow frantically. His bones also did the same, and in an instant they increased by a huge chunk, to the point that his pants could no longer cover him. His head had also grown larger. The beard grew outwards like weeds and the hair on his head stretched outwards in all directions. His leg and chest hair had become incomparably thick, ripping even the dragon robe. Not long after that, Emperor Yanfeng became a giant that was over 30 yards tall and laid on the ground, unable to move. Half of the hall was covered in hair and the emperor was drowned out in this dense thicket. "Your poison is a little intense, senior brother." The corners of Qin Mu's eyes twitched. On the other side, transparent spider silks suddenly started pouring out from Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Even the pores of his skin had quite a number of spider silks pouring out, coiling around him. He soon looked like a huge dumpling that was wrapped sturdily. Little Poison King looked over at him with a grave expression. "Isn't your tonic a little too nourishing?" The two of them looked at each other before raising their brushes to write down prescriptions again. When they wanted to call the emperor to order people to grab the herbs, only then did they remember that the emperor was still drowned out by the hair. The two of them could only give a cough and summon the imperial physicians outside the hall by themselves. The imperial physicians that were waiting for orders trembled in fear when they saw the thick hair that was spreading from inside the hall and crawling down the steps. Not long after that, the imperial physicians came back with the herbs and Qin Mu started refining once again. Little Poison King also hurried to raise his insects. Qin Mu pulled out his 2 pig slaughtering knives and chopped off countless hairs to find the emperor. It required quite some effort to send the medicine in to him. On the other side, the warts on Little Poison King's face burst open and venomous insects brought the medicine that was refined into the cocoon, sending it into Imperial Preceptor's body. "Crap! The two of them observed the situation, and their complexions turned green. It seems the poisons and the medicine are a little imbalanced. Even though the hair no longer grew on the emperor's sides, poison had started to pour from his orifices, while Imperial Preceptor's hairs started to grow. The two of doctors picked up their brushes in a hurry and started to write prescriptions again. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 270 Twin Sisters. Qin Mu and the Little Poison King had changed the prescription 7 to 8 times, and they were getting slightly flustered. It was the first time they were working together, after all, so there would always be some places that weren't as they wanted, some places where they couldn't complement each other perfectly. Furthermore, both of them wanted to outdo each other. So the tonic that Qin Mu gave Little Poison King wasn't just 30 to 50 times stronger, but 60 times stronger instead. The bottle of poisonous liquid that Little Poison King had given Qin Mu also had a higher toxicity. The two of them pitted their abilities against each other, and the ones suffering were the Emperor and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, who got tortured endlessly. What's more, they couldn't even move, struggle, or call for help. The Emperor's body started shrinking, returning to its ordinary size before long. However, he didn't stop there and soon reached the size of a newborn baby. I should really have planted executioners in this hall to execute these two scoundrels of divine physicians, thought the Emperor, who was drowning in his own hair. On the other side, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's body was still swelling. And not only that, for he could feel something growing on his buttocks. It seemed like a furry tail. His armpits felt itchy, and he felt a few more bones growing around his armpits. When they cracked and grew outwards, it seemed like he was growing 2 wings. It would have been still fine if he had grown 2 huge wings, but the crux was that the wings stopped growing after reach a foot's length. The bodies of the two patients were sometimes cold and sometimes warm. Sometimes they felt they had descended into hell and rolled on mountains of knives, while at other times they felt as if they were becoming immortals and felt incomparably comfortable. However, being comfortable was the most dangerous, as that was their souls dissolving. Sometimes, pain came flooding over from all parts of their body and was 100 to 1,000 times more painful than extreme heartache. Sometimes, they felt as if there were tens of thousands of needles stabbing their bodies, and at other times, they felt as if they had been soaked in an unbearably acidic vinegar vat. In the hall, Qin Mu sat on the hair that filled the ground, holding the brush in one hand and resting his chin on the other as he fell into a daze. Not far away, Little Poison King's brows were tensed and he paced around anxiously. He kept on thinking about how he could continue the treatment. Both of them were stumped with a difficult problem. Qin Mu had raised his brush several times but could never write anything down. Little Poison King had also raised his brush several times and placed it down again. Ling Yuxiu at that moment popped her head into and saw the two troubled guys, so she asked softly, "The one that herds cows, how is it going?" Before Qin Mu could answer, Little Poison King chuckled. "You are the 6th princess, right?" Ling Yuxiu thought for a moment and said, "Now that my elder brother is the eldest prince, I'm indeed number 6. Eldest prince is also the current crown Prince Yuxiu." Little Poison King then added in a harsh tone, "Congratulations, 6th princess. Due to the quack's treatment, your brother will soon ascend the throne to be the emperor." Ling Yuxiu jumped in shock and looked at Qin Mu anxiously. Almost sobbing, she stuttered, "To the one that herds cows, are you going to cure father to death?" "Don't be afraid, sister, he won't die." Qin Mu consoled her. He then sneered, "Before I cure the emperor to death, Imperial Preceptor will be treated to death by that idiot. Without the support of Imperial Preceptor, your brother will be overthrown in a matter of days even if he becomes the emperor." Ling Yuxiu was about to cry. "You guys are just scaring me, right?" Little Poison King mocked. "Even if Imperial Preceptor would die in my hands, it would be because he was nourished to death by your tonic." Qin Mu then turned to ridicule him back. "The emperor may be treated to death by me, but he would have died under your poison, so you can forget about walking out of the palace alive." The two of them stared at each other, and anger blazed in their eyes as they wanted more than anything to poison each other to death. Ling Yuxiu was furious and shouted out, "Both of you, if father and Imperial Preceptor die from your treatments, both of you can forget about leaving the palace alive." Where are the executioners? Executioners! Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor both let out a sigh of relief as they thought to themselves, Yuxiu, sixth princess, is still the sensible one. Otherwise, if those two scoundrels continued to fight like this, we would end up dead or about to die. The imperial bodyguards of the palace swarmed over and came to stand guard outside the hall. Ling Yuxiu looked at them with murder in her eyes as she put her hands on her waist to scold the two of them. The executioners are right outside, so both of you have to listen to me. Since one of you can't suppress the other's tonic and the other can't handle their poison, then both of you shall swap. That ugly one, you shall treat father. The one that herds cows, you shall treat imperial preceptor. Qin Mu rose to look at Little Poison King and said solemnly, swap patience. Little Poison King's eyes lighted up and he said, if you treat imperial preceptor and I treat the emperor, a miracle might just happen. The two of them immediately swapped patience and examined their situations. After it, they sighed in relief and looked each other in the eyes. Moments before, Qin Mu had begun planning to take the Dragon Qilin and hide in great ruins, while Little Poison King had also planned to escape and lie low. As for the experts outside, it would be a stretch for them to hold these two divine doctors back. It was just a matter of a dosage of poison. However, after they swapped patience, they discovered they could clean up the mess the other had made, and this way they wouldn't have to worry about escaping after causing the deaths of the Emperor and Imperial Preceptor. Qin Mu and Little Poison King raised their brushes to write down the prescriptions for the Imperial physicians to grab the herbs. The both of them diagnosed and treated their patients with great care, changing their prescriptions repeatedly. After close to 3 days, the hair on the Emperor's body dropped off and the cocoon on Imperial Preceptor's body gradually vanished. The injuries on Imperial Preceptor's body gradually lessened and the remnants of the god's divine arts weakened. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was also able to mobilize some cultivation. Even though the Emperor's divine treasures were still in ruins, Little Poison King had used countless venomous spiders to carry over vital chi and life force to rebuild them. With the powerful life force from Qin Mu's medicine used for restoration, there should be no more big problems. Their injuries healing was just a matter of time. Ling Yuxiu summoned a few eunuchs to clean up the palace. These eunuchs filled up several carts of hair, and while another was filled up with tails, wings, extra arms, and legs that had dropped off from Imperial Preceptor. There really aren't any more big problems. Qin Mu looked at Little Poison King, and Little Poison King also looked over at him at that moment. They sneered at each other. Ling Yuxiu seemed to have met her greatest foes and immediately said nervously, no more fighting. Qin Mu wrote down a prescription and made the imperial physicians grab the herbs. He stretched his body and smiled. I won't fight with him. I'm tired after diagnosing and treating the Emperor and Imperial Preceptor for the past few days. I'm going back to rest. Little Poison King also said in a sinister manner, I'm also tired, so I have to return to sleep. You can leave the rest of the stuff to the quacks at the door. Ling Yuxiu looked at Little Poison King, then turned to Qin Mu and said, the one that herds cows. Let me send you back to Imperial College. Qin Mu hesitated, then shook his head. No need, you also haven't rested for the past 2 days. I must, the girl said firmly. Qin Mu saw that she was insistent on sending him and could only nod in agreement. The two of them then waited a moment for the imperial physicians to come back with the herbs. Little Poison King sniffed the air for the smell of herbs, but since they had used numerous herbs these days, the smell in the hall was thick, and it was hard for him to differentiate. Qin Mu took the herbs and Ling Yuxiu hurriedly went after him. Little Poison King also followed behind. When they passed by the Jade Band River in the palace, he suddenly jumped into the water with a plop and never came out after that. Ling Yuxiu looked down with a cry of astonishment. He escaped by the river. The one that herds cows? Could he be afraid of you? Qin Mu shook his head. He isn't afraid of me. He's afraid of Empress Dowager. Just as he was saying that, Jade Band River suddenly rose into the sky, and the water floated in the sky like a huge silver-colored python. 2 palace maids raised lanterns and walked over to shine into the river. Countless sword lights in the flames of the lanterns shot off and went into Jade Band River. Empress Dowager, that person is not in the river. The two palace maids with lanterns saluted a tall building at the side. Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu immediately looked towards there and saw Empress Dowager standing on the balcony. She had lifted one of her hands before, and that moment, she gently placed it down. The water of Jade Band River instantly whooshed downward and filled the canal. Qin Mu saluted the balcony and Empress Dowager smiled. "Little divine physician, is the emperor cured?" Qin Mu said. "He still needs to recuperate and will recover to his peak in a few years." Empress Dowager nodded and said, "Yuxiu, bring these two palace maids with you to send little divine physician off for me." Ling Yuxiu smiled. "I was just planning to return to Imperial College with him." Empress Dowager walked into the building, and the two palace maids carrying the lanterns followed behind Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu. Walking out of the palace, Qin Mu suddenly stopped and told the two palace maids, "Go back. I won't need you for the journey ahead." The two palace maids were a pair of twins, and they were alike in looks. They were both bright and quick-witted as they shook their heads in unison. "Empress Dowager has instructed us to send Divine Physician back to Imperial College." Qin Mu frowned slightly and said to Ling Yuxiu, "Sister, go back with them." Ling Yuxiu shook her head. "With me by your side, little Poison King won't dare to lay his hands on you." Qin Mu sighed. "To us apothecaries, there's no one we don't dare to poison to death. I originally just needed to protect myself, but now I will have to protect you as well, so I'm afraid it might be a bit strenuous." That two palace maids giggled. "What little divine physician said is truly interesting. You are still on 5 Elements realm, while little Poison King and us sisters are on 7 Stars realm. Furthermore, Empress Dowager has granted us a treasure to deal with little Poison King. With us sisters around, if little Poison King dares to come, he will definitely be taken down by us." Qin Mu shook his head and didn't persuade them to leave. "Apothecaries can kill people regardless of their realm. You two are too naive. Even for me, poisoning strong practitioners of Celestial Being realm isn't a problem, so what do you think it's like for little Poison King? It's fine even if you want to follow me, but be more alert. I'm afraid I can't look after both of you." The two palace maids giggled non-stop. There were many people on the street, and the two palace maids carried a lantern in front and at the back. Carrying a lantern in the morning was very eye-catching, but since they were dressed in the outfits of the palace, no one came forward to inquire about it. Imperial College was far from the palace, but after walking 6 to 7 miles, they still hadn't seen anything. Qin Mu refined medicine on the way and finally finished refining the few packets of herbs he had been carrying. He then stretched his hand into his Taotai sack, so only his arm and shoulder could be seen jerking gently. The hand technique that he executed and the medicine that was being refined in the Taotai sack could not be seen. The two palace maids were very alert, and any flies or spiders on the way were all slaughtered by the two women with sword lights. None of the insects could get close to them. As they continued, a chilly wind blew over, and the two women immediately roused their vital qi. The light of the lanterns suddenly became brighter, and the lights formed 2 circular barriers to cover them, not allowing the wind to blow in. One of the palace maids laughed. "Does little Poison King only have these kinds of methods?" Just as she said that, her delicate face suddenly turned black and she collapsed. Her sister behind also collapsed with a thud, no longer able to move. Ling Yuxiu was startled and looked around in a hurry before asking, "Why are we fine?" Thud. She collapsed with her face facing upwards. After the 3 women collapsed, a few pitch-black tentacles covered in spikes crawled out from the ground. The lower legs of the women had been pricked by the tentacles, poisoning them. Qin Mu flicked his finger, and those tentacles flailed and dissolved with a sizzle, turning into small puddles. The ground trembled, and it seemed like there was a huge creature which moving under the ground. Qin Mu took out 3 spirit pills to suppress the toxicity of the poison so the trio would regain their consciousness. Suddenly, a grunt came from afar. "You gave tonic to my baby?" Boom! The ground trembled and split open, causing the houses to collapse. From beneath, a weird insect that was about 30 yards tall and hundreds of yards long tunneled out. Its entire body was covered with tentacles, and it was the insect king that little Poison King was raising. Just as Little Poison King returned this Insect King to his side, the Insect King's body started swelling from Qin Mu's tonic. He wasn't able to suppress it even if he wanted. At that moment, Little Poison King was pathetically sprawled on the back of the Insect King. "What are you waiting for?" Qin Mu asked the two palace maids beside him. They were still groggy, but they poured their vital qi into the lanterns when they heard him. The lantern light shone towards the Insect King like swords and pierced through the creature, turning it into a broken sieve. Little Poison King suffered numerous sword wounds and vanished into a puff of smoke. The two palace maids immediately shone down on the ground, and with the light from the lanterns, the ground actually became transparent. Their light could actually shine dozens of yards below the ground. However, the poison in the two women hadn't yet detoxified. It had only been suppressed by Qin Mu. They quickly felt the toxicity in their bodies about to break out again, so they didn't dare to activate their magic powers. Qin Mu said, "No need to chase him. He already suffered a defeat, and if you force him to the end of his rope, he could poison everyone in the capital city. Instead, I better cure the poison both of you received. Otherwise, it will be too late." Qin Mu extracted a tiny drop of fresh blood from the three of them and saw that their blood was already black. Even though they were all poisoned by the same venomous king, the amount of venom in their bodies was different, so he had to help them separately. On the way, Qin Mu worked to identify the poison and cure them. By the time they reached Scholar's residence, even though the poison within the three women had been detoxified, there were still some remnants left, which made them lightheaded. Before they could even reach Qin Mu's room, they all collapsed onto the floor. Qin Mu frowned and dragged them all into his residence. He threw Ling Yuxiu and the two palace maids onto the bed before going back to close the door. At the door, the dragon Qilin said, "Cult Master, don't worry. I will definitely not let anyone come in. I understand very well in my heart." "You have done well," Qin Mu praised him. He was simply too exhausted for the past few days, so when he returned to his room, he laid down among the three women and fell asleep. As he slept, he suddenly felt a slight itch at his nose and guessed it was the hair from one of the girls. With a passing flip, he pushed one of them out of the bed.